The action begins in the Devil's Palace, also known as Marima's demonic alliance, where, to the newcomer's surprise, a huge crowd has gathered. A bearded man explains that they are ready to accept anyone, regardless of their faction or sect, and teach them demonic martial arts if they have talent. He wonders what kind of fool would pass up such an opportunity. His companion complains that he is too old, otherwise he would have applied himself. The bearded man's attention is drawn to a strange sight in the crowd, and he wonders if someone has died, seeing this guy in the crowd. But his companion scoffs at this conclusion, reminding him that the Tens competition at the Devil's Palace has not yet begun. The bearded man asks again who this young man is, who looks like an embalmer undertaker. All eyes turn to the young man walking through the crowd. This young man, named Bo-un-sol, thinks of his grandfather, and that this is only the beginning. Won-sol remembers his grandfather, who gave him this name after finding him abandoned in a snowy field. Won-sol continues to reminisce, remembering how he learned the craft of burying the dead from his grandfather, who was also an undertaker. He recalls telling his grandfather that the body belonged to an expert in an extremely fast fencing style, explaining that he came to this conclusion after observing the highly developed muscles in the left leg, especially the front of the shin, which is a characteristic feature of practitioners of this style of sword fighting. His grandfather smiles, impressed by his grandson's keen observation, and praises him, saying that he is a heaven-sent undertaker. Won-sol recalls how difficult his life was, and how people hated him because of his profession, but he was happy to be close to his grandfather, who was his support through all the hardships he went through, until that fateful day. One night, his grandfather woke up worried, but it was quiet outside, with only the bamboo swaying in the wind. His grandfather noticed someone outside and sighed, saying that good people never look for you, and those who look for you are never good. While Won-sol was sleeping, the grandfather quickly shook the boy's shoulders and woke him up, and suggested they play a game to see who could pretend to be dead better. The boy didn't understand, and asked why it was so late. Then his grandfather promised him that he would buy him the clothes and sword he had always wanted if he played well this time, and his face lit up with joy. The next second, the boy was still happily in the coffin, and his grandfather spoke to him one last time. The grandfather asked him to try to hold out until sunrise, which surprised him. The boy was shocked at how long they would be playing. After that, the grandfather left the house, slamming the door shut, and took out his sword. Something was about to happen. Finally, he walked out the gate and peered into the darkness ahead of him. Outside, a mysterious man was waiting for Grandfather Won-sol, and this man addressed the grandfather, saying that he was well hidden, like a rat. Then he revealed the grandfather's true identity, calling him Bo-ganya, the seven-branched demonic blade. Grandfather admitted that he hadn't heard that name in a long time. The mysterious man scolded him for abandoning his post as deputy master of the palace, to live a miserable life and do dirty work such as burying the dead. And then he attacked him. An explosion almost occurred, but Grandfather corrected the mysterious man's mistake as if nothing had happened. He stopped his blade with 2 fingers and explained that he had taken up this profession not to live a miserable life, but to atone for his sins. The killer still smiled wildly, realizing that the old man had not lost his touch. Then Grandfather offered him his life, asking him to kill him somewhere else so that no innocent people would get hurt. And the mysterious man laughed mockingly, right in his face. The mysterious man agreed to the old man's request to be transported to heaven, or, more likely, to hell, and warns him not to try to escape. The old man stood humbly and looked at his killer. Meanwhile, Won-sol hides nearby, and he breathes a sigh of relief, believing the danger has passed, knocking the lid off the coffin. But soon he begins to shiver and thinks he can no longer bear it. For although he desperately wants the uniform and sword promised by his grandfather, the cold has become unbearable. Won-sol comes out of hiding and wonders where his grandfather is, who usually waited for him after their game was over, and he assumes that the guards have called him again. He is angry at those people who do not see undertakers as human beings. Won-sol moves forward through this place and freezes for a moment in complete horror as he witnesses a horrific scene with his own eyes, with sword marks covering the entire surface of the ground. He immediately felt the wind rushing through his hair and head, and he realized that this did not bode well. He quickly runs to find his grandfather. Then his pace slows as he gets closer and closer to the key event. What he saw shocked him, and tears mixed with sweat on his face. He saw his grandfather lying on the ground with blood flowing from his eyes. Won-sol screams, calling for his grandfather, and rushes to him, asking in shock what happened. But he only apologizes to him. As soon as he ran up close, his grandfather immediately recognized his boy. The boy tried to find out what had happened, but his grandfather quietly interrupted him. His grandfather tells him that his time has come and tries to ask him not to continue practicing the craft of burying the dead. But he coughed up blood before he could finish his sentence. One soul begged him to stop talking, but he insisted that the boy listen to him carefully and asks him never to think of revenge. A crying Unsol listened attentively to him, water streaming down his face like rain, and then he clenched his teeth tightly in rage. He rejects his request, saying that he cannot forgive those who did this to him. He tells him that he would rather die and go with him, reminding him of his constant words that there is no difference between hell and this world, and that he would rather be in hell with him than stay here without him. The old man immediately began to cry in front of the young man, and said that he did not think it would be so difficult to face his death. As a final request, the grandfather begs him to go far, far away, and crying, tells him that he was very happy during the time they spent together. Then he takes his last breath right in the boy's arms, and falls from the shocked boy's arms onto the ground. Wonsol's face is covered in tears. He cannot believe what is happening. He just stared at the body of his beloved mentor, the man who had replaced his father. His eyes widened, letting out more and more tears. After a while, his eyes were no longer so wet, but his face no longer expressed any emotion. Wonsol stands in front of his grandfather's body, which he has prepared for burial. He touches his face and realizes that his request not to seek revenge was to protect him. But with a crazed look on his face, he decides that he cannot obey him this time. With tears in his eyes, he begins to carefully examine his wounds and notices that his hands were cut off at the same time. The blows were made with a rare downward chopping motion. The killer was no ordinary person. Examining his deceased grandfather's face further, he discovers that the attacker then abruptly changed his movement in the middle to also gouge out his eyes. His teeth clenched again in rage. His eyes rolled back due to muscle spasms and intense anger. Unsol concludes that this strange sword style must be from a demonic sect and identifies it as the Tiankui yoga technique. He then moves on to examine his back and finds 93 marks from the use of a hidden weapon, which leads him to conclude that the attacker had no accomplices but used a tool capable of launching hundreds of hidden weapons at once. Finally, he notices a strange color change under the tongue and fingernails. Now they were purple. Wonsol concludes that such a color change occurs when poisoned with a deadly toxin that causes the flesh and blood to rot. Based on everything he has seen, he compiles a description of the killer. This is a man belonging to a demonic sect who has studied the Tianqi yoga technique, possesses high-quality hidden weapons, and uses a deadly weapon that causes flesh to rot and blood to spoil. And Unsol believes that there cannot be many people who fit this description. He looks at his grandfather's body with determination and closes his eyes to concentrate. Then, opening his bloodshot eyelids, he swears that he will find the killer, no matter what it takes. The drops of blood from the past slowly flowed into the tears of the present and fell onto the forms. Wonsol arrives at the reception desk at the Devil's Palace and writes his name, Bo Wonsol, of the Ganyang clan. The employees mock him, wondering what kind of rural clan Gangyang is, and assume that he was probably frightened when he saw the consent forms for the waiver of bodily autonomy. While one of them rudely demands that he leave his fingerprint or leave, Wonsol quietly raised his hand to his mouth and bit his thumb until it bled without moving a muscle in his face. All this was to the great astonishment of the employees. Wonsol stamped the form and thought that the moment his grandfather died, his life was ruined, and he had nothing left but the path of revenge. After he stamped the document, he immediately left, leaving the registration guards in complete shock at the young man's aura. He walked out of the building, thinking only that this competition would be his first step toward revenge. Then, the long history of conflict between the orthodox and unorthodox sects for control of the Murima world is examined. The orthodox sects, seeking justice, are led by the Murima Alliance, while the unorthodox sects are centered around the Devil's Palace, which worships power alone. These two forces maintained a balance for a long time, but the orthodox sects wanted to gain the upper hand, which led to the creation of 18 martial arts masters, known as the Greatest Good Masters. To counter this new threat, the Devil's Palace decided to develop a way to increase its power, and their plan was to create the 10 Demon Lords. This proposal, which required the selection of 10 geniuses regardless of their previous affiliation, and training them in the martial arts of 10 demonic sects, attracted many young people who headed to the Devil's Palace. Unsol stood among the crowd of young masters, who had gathered here not just for the sake of it, but to show their strength, and felt a powerful aura emanating from only a small number of those present. His eyes immediately widened in rage, He remembered his goal, and the guy thought that there was probably someone among them who was connected to his grandfather's murderer. The guy scanned everyone who was at this stage of selection. Since the killer was a martial arts master who surpassed his abilities, Won-Sol realizes that in order to take revenge on such a figure, he must become a martial arts master himself. And since he had neither connections nor martial arts skills at the moment, becoming one of the 10 demon lords is his only way to quickly become stronger, and he will not let it slip away. Suddenly, the contenders look in amazement at someone, as a majestic man with thick white hair and red eyes appears, announces in a loud voice that his name is Chief Instructor Hook Ryun-young, and those present recognize him as the blood-eyed golden dagger. Chief Instructor Hook Ryun-young continues his speech, explaining that this place is intended to identify the greatest geniuses from all the demonic sects, and that only those who pass all the tests prepared for them will become candidates for the 10 demon lords. Then he announces the first test, and the main character listens attentively. It will be a test in which the fighters of the Devil's Palace will check the physical fitness of the participants, which puzzles some participants who are expecting a competition or a fight. The test begins, and the examiners examine the muscles and bones of the candidates with their hands. As soon as the examiner is satisfied with the physical data, he sends the fighter somewhere else. Won-Sol notices that those who pass this examination are sent to the next place. When it is Won-Sol's turn, one of the examiners approaches him, and quickly and sharply touching his hand, shows signs of shock and despair, and thinks to himself that this young man is finished. He is simply in terrible condition. Although he is surprised that someone with Won-Sol's physique is participating at all, he senses a genuine, unmistakable intent to kill emanating from him, which frightens him greatly. But he still decides that he cannot let him pass. Won-Sol is not surprised by the result, as he realized that everything he had learned so far was how to care for corpses, and that he would not be able to pass a test based on physical training in martial arts. However, he believed that this was not the end. Shortly thereafter, an announcement was made throughout the square that the first test had been completed. After the first test was over, one of the failures shouted in protest that the test was completely unfair, and wondering what was the point of holding the competition if only physical training was important. The chief instructor responded by explaining that muscles and bones are the most important things for learning martial arts, and that they held this competition to select naturally talented people from different regions. Then he scolds him for daring to complain when he couldn't even meet the simplest standards. The instructor's eyes immediately lit up with a yellow flash of rage and power, and the student felt incredible pressure, even though the man reassured them that there was no need to worry, and announced that in the second test, he would personally select those who could learn martial arts well, despite their poor physical training. He immediately announced the start of the second test, and the chief instructor orders everyone who failed the first test to fight each other until only one person remains alive. Everyone is shocked, wondering how this can be a test, and they are ordered to kill each other when they are all on the same side. But one of the participants smiles, the very one who is too weak to pass the first test. He thinks this situation plays into his hands if someone needs to be killed. He turns his gaze to Insolya and the red-haired young man. Then the madman abruptly grabbed the hilt of his weapon and raises his huge spear sword, deciding to start with him, and attacks him with a cry for him to die. In the blink of an eye, blood splatters. The attacker, whose name is Won Chung, managed to hit his target. Chuk Ren stood in horror with a huge wound in his stomach and a spear in it. He also recognized his killer. He skillfully kills the red-haired young man, shocking and horrifying the other participants. Won-Sol observes the situation and tries to analyze it, noticing that the killer barely avoided the ribs and hit him right in the heart, and concludes that although his physique is weak, his reflexes and agility are sharp. Won Chung stands boasting of his deed and challenges anyone who wants to share the same fate to come forward and fight him. From a distance, one of the officials comments that Won Chung is acting decisively but lacks common sense. And the chief instructor agrees, saying that the place is full of useless fools. The examiner observes the situation, thinking that in such battles, demonstrating strength makes you a target, but he believes that what has happened will spur others to action. Indeed, terror and chaos reign among the participants, because if they do nothing, they will be killed too, and they begin to attack each other indiscriminately, screaming in panic. Then one of them came to his senses and realized that he didn't want to kill anyone, but immediately another blow hits him. A meat grinder has begun in the square. The chief instructor notes that young people are not accustomed to death, and the fighting between the students intensifies as each of them mercilessly kills the other. The chief instructor adds that their feelings are easily paralyzed when they are confronted with their potential demise. But he and his assistant soon see that this is not the case for everyone, as it seems that not everyone present is a fool. Even the official was shocked. Finally, a worthy candidate, because Unsol and another fighter kept their composure and clarity of mind and stood calmly, even though they were both right in the middle of the carnage. Unsol observes what is happening around him and thinks that they are fools because they allowed the fear of death to control them. Unsol rationally analyzes the situation and understands that the chief instructor's order was to survive until only one person remained, which meant that the goal was to survive, not to kill. He is confident that he can ensure his survival if he thinks rationally and act calmly, as his late grandfather, the Savior, taught him, and he swears that he will survive, no matter what it takes. At the same time, the battles were becoming more and more fierce. Suddenly, one of the fighters approaches him, thinking that he looks pathetic and must have been hiding all this time. Yunsol notices the marks of thin, skillful swords on the bodies around him and concludes that this is the work of a thin blade. The fighter decides to kill him himself and throw something. He attacks him with a strange weapon, but Yunsol gracefully dodges, and the blow hits the box he was carrying. After this blow, the clothes fall to the ground. The attacker mocks him, asking what use the box on his back is, and whether he sells funeral supplies. Yunsol ignores him, and picks up some fabric from the ground, and for a moment, she is lost in memories, and remembers her grandfather, as well as the gift, the cloth and sword, and a card that his grandfather gave him for his birthday, and his red eyes flash with anger and determination. The guy's aura was like that of a titan ready to crush anyone. The main character stood opposite the bastard, and next to him was his sword. The attacker sees that he is holding strange tools, and sarcastically asks what he can do with such a flimsy sword. Before he can finish his attack, another calm fighter appears behind him. He then lunged at him and killed him with a single sword stroke, cutting his back in two. The bastard immediately fell, and now another fighter stood in front of the main character, either a friend or an enemy. This fighter tells Unsol that he doesn't need to thank him, and that the presence of such a pathetic person as him distracts his opponents and makes his task easier. Unsol said nothing, but began to gather all his belongings that had fallen from the blow of the fool who broke his box. The calm one adds that, although he has sharp insight, it seems that he has never studied martial arts, and that he could kill someone like him at any moment, proving it by killing a man without even looking at him. Finally, the guy paid attention to him, but there was no sign of surprise or admiration on his face. From a distance, the chief instructor observes the situation, and his attention is drawn to the calm guy's sword, which he recognizes as the Sword of Annihilation, the legendary sword of the Black Soul Master, who was known as the strongest wandering swordsman. His assistant explains that the young man's name is Nyon Wangan, and it is said that he found the secret manual and sword of the Black Soul in a secluded valley. He adds that since he trained only from the manual, his techniques lack refinement, and his movements leave many gaps. The discussion between the instructors continues, with the assistant mentioning that Nyon Wangan is currently the Black Soul's only disciple, and that despite his lack of physical strength, he is a strong candidate to become one of the 10 demon lords, and possibly even the winner of this trial. The chief instructor agrees, adding that although Wangan is still a novice, unworthy of wielding the Sword of Annihilation, there seems to be no one stronger than him among those present, unless something completely unexpected happens. Unless someone is hiding even greater power. The camera immediately switches to our main character, who is examining his limbs and realizes that the cuts on them are quite severe. After a long time, and at the end of a brutal battle, in an arena full of corpses, only 2 people remain alive, Nyang Wangan and Unsol. Wangang stands on the training ground and expresses surprise that Unsol is the one who managed to survive to the end. Then he turns to him and challenges him, saying that if he kills him, he will also become a candidate for the 10 demon lords, and invites him to attack. Wangang stands on the training ground and expresses surprise that Unsol is the one who managed to survive to the end. Although he understands that Wangang is the strongest here, the guy still held his sword firmly, ready to attack quickly and without regret, because he had already discovered his weakness, and he was sure that he could defeat him without a doubt. After all, when he fought all his opponents, the hero sat down and studied all the bodies he left behind, and studied his fighting style from the corpses he left behind. The hero jumps up from his seat and goes to his opponent, who sarcastically suggests testing his skills a little, and then launches a fierce attack on him. Unsol skillfully dodges his successive blows, so he only gets away with superficial wounds. Wangang mocks him, saying that all he can do is clumsily dodge and that it's impressive how he's lasted this long. The chief instructor and his assistant watch the fight and notice that although Unsol seems to be helplessly allowing himself to be beaten, he is actually moving his body at the last moment of each strike to avoid fatal injury. The assistant instructor realizes with amazement that Unsol has memorized Wangan's attack patterns by studying corpses, and he admires his remarkable level of observation. Wangan is shocked to hear that, despite all this barrage of attacks, all he has done is cut his flesh, and his words shock him, and that after all this flurry of attacks, all he has done is cut his flesh, and his words shock him. The instructors are amazed at her audacity in provoking him, realizing that, despite his good evasions, launching a counterattack is another matter entirely, especially with his frail body, which would make it difficult to deliver an effective blow. Wangan is angered by his words and tells him that he had planned to let him live a little longer, but his arrogance has made him decide to grant his wish to die quickly. He shouts that he will grant his wish and prepares to deliver the final blow. Wangan is furious at his words and tells him that he had planned to let him live a little longer, but his arrogance has made him decide to grant his wish to die quickly, and realizes that now he will have only one chance. He remembers what he discovered when examining the corpses, and understands the important points. His final blow always targets the opponent's vital points, in particular, precise sword strikes to the heart and head. He concludes that when he fights with the intention to kill, his sword inevitably targets the upper body of his opponent. Accordingly, when Wangan lunges at him, aiming for his head, Unsol quickly ducks and dodges the blow, and directs his counterattack at his neck, exploiting the weakness he has discovered. In the heat of battle, Unsol recalls his knowledge of the vital point Tiantu, a weak spot that is difficult to fortify even for martial arts masters. And he remembers that if a child strikes it with all their might, an adult can instantly lose consciousness. Unsol uses this knowledge and delivers his decisive blow, and directs his small sword at Wangan's neck. In an instant, several thick drops of blood splattered onto the ground. The sun was already setting on the horizon, and Wangan was standing there, dead, bleeding out. And beneath him stood our guy, who quickly pulled his blade out of his neck, cutting him even more. And the body falls to the ground, revealing the face of the main character to us. And so, Unsol, whose face and eyes were completely covered in blood, emerges victorious from the duel. Exhausted and bloodied, Unsol stands there, wondering if it's really over. The instructors watch the scene in shock, and the assistant comments that what happened was a complete surprise, while the chief instructor expresses his disappointment, as he had high expectations for the Black Soul sword technique. He then announces in a loud voice that Unsol has passed the second test. As soon as he hears this news, Unsol falls into one of his memories and loses consciousness, falling into a mysterious black and white dream, in which he sees his grandfather calling him. He joyfully runs towards him, telling him where he is, and it seems like his grandfather is very close by, so the boy speeds up to catch up with him. But when he reaches him, his grandfather tells him that he cannot see him. The dream suddenly turns into a nightmare, in which he sees his grandfather's disfigured face, confirming that he cannot see him at all, and he wakes up in terror. Unsol wakes up, gasping for breath and breathing heavily, and then finds herself in a strange place, surrounded by young fighters of various ages. The scene shifts outside this place, and we see a very beautiful turquoise water surface. Then we see water crashing against the bottom of a ship, and Unsol realizes that he is inside the ship because he lost consciousness from heavy blood loss. He notices that his serious injuries have been treated, and he no longer feels any pain, so he assumes that he was treated by a famous doctor, befitting the status of the Devil's Palace. He looks around to see the other survivors and notices that they are physically fit, and he recognizes some faces, so he concludes that these are the ones who passed the first test. He feels their contemptuous glances, but realizes that this was to be expected. Suddenly, the ship's door to the deck above them opens, and everyone is ordered to exit, and one of the officials announces that they have reached the next test zone. Their ship had already sailed to the so-called Island of Hell, the hellish path. As soon as their ship finally moored to the shore, the instructor immediately jumped off and told them that they were now in real hell. Then he turned to all the candidates and ordered them to quickly follow him. The candidates immediately followed the official onto the ominous-looking island, where he pointed to a group of caves and told them that they would sleep in them. He ordered them to put aside their old clothes and weapons and put on new clothes and swords that had been prepared for them, adding that they were free to choose a cave that suited them. One of the survivors says he has found a cave and, contrary to expectations, finds it suitable and comfortable. Meanwhile, a fight breaks out between two candidates over the right to one of the caves, but the others intervene to stop the dispute. Insol watches them and thinks that these people have no idea what happened in the second trial, and that they are all complacent and relaxed. He also notices that many of them are dressed in expensive clothes, and he wonders if they are all from prestigious clans. Yunso reflects on what happened and concludes that the second trial was a way to get rid of people who could be easily killed. Meanwhile, the official who is supervising the distribution of caves approaches him, reproaches him for his slowness, and urges him to hurry up and choose. The official immediately tells Insol that, although the young man's sharp gaze caught his attention, he did not expect him to survive. And now, he is curious to see his next decision. Insol points to a dark and unattractive cave, announcing that he has chosen it. Ugh, some kind of brown sludge was even flowing out of it. How disgusting. The official mocks him, saying that he has chosen a place that matches his shabby clothes, and that he is simply disgusting because of this choice. But the official is impressed by his choice, and thinks he is a true genius, because he knows that, although the entrance to the cave looks small and dirty, inside is spacious enough for training, and its small entrance makes it easy to defend against uninvited guests. The official saw that most people avoided this cave because of its entrance, but Insol was able to accurately assess the situation, and then the official asks him to prepare for the next stage. Here it comes. After everyone put on their new uniforms, the official began to explain the next task. He explains that there are 10 martial arts training facilities on Hell Island, and in each building, they can learn the martial arts of one of 10 demonic sects. He adds that they can study all of them or focus on just one, and that they have complete freedom in organizing their schedule, whether it be sleeping, playing games, studying martial arts, or training on their own. This surprises Insol, as he remembers the cruelty of the second trial, and cannot believe that they will be allowed to train in peace. Soon, the survivors begin to wonder which martial art they should learn first, and most of them agree on the Sword of Fire sect, which they have heard is the strongest. Everyone rushes there. Insol watches them, thinking that he has also heard that they are the strongest among the demonic sects, and that learning their martial arts would definitely be useful. But he decides that it is not for him, since he has never studied any martial arts before. So he doesn't need to start with the strongest. His eyes widen sharply with understanding. Insol thinks about what he really needs right now, and chooses a different path. After a while, Insol moves in the direction of one of the martial arts training centers. He looks up, and his gaze is not very surprised. After all, Insol arrives at an old and dilapidated building and recognizes it as the Wandering Beast Pavilion. A fallen sect, he recalls that the reputation of this pavilion has deteriorated so much that it is barely counted among the 10 demonic sects, and that the only reason it survives is because of its history of producing a significant number of the strongest martial arts masters of their time. He also thinks and remembers what his grandfather told him about them. Insol decides to train here, but as he moves forward, he notices that the ground in front of him is moving. What's going on? The sand behind him shifted strangely, and suddenly something burst out of it. It was quite unexpected. Suddenly, a man's head appears from the ground. The man introduces himself as Sava, master of the secret wing of the Wandering Beast Pavilion, and asks him if he came here hoping to become one of the 10 demon lords. Insol initially stood in a fighting stance, as he had not expected this at all. But then he replied respectfully, confirming that he had come to study the martial arts of the Wandering Beast Pavilion. Sava looks him up and down, humming for a long time. Then he laughs and orders him to leave so as not to hasten his death, declaring that he had no intention of teaching martial arts, especially to someone who looked as frail as him. Insol confidently responds to Master Sava, explaining that he has heard that if he studies the martial arts of the Wandering Beast Pavilion, he will gain the ability to survive in any situation. Sava mocks his words, expressing surprise that he knows about martial arts that are on the verge of extinction. He then warns him that even the greatest geniuses find it difficult to study these martial arts, because they begin with a change in the body, and with his current physical condition, he will die within a day. Then he orders him to leave, since he understands everything. Instead of leaving, Insol bows low and presses his forehead to the ground. Sava asks him in surprise what he is doing, and Insol replies that since he has agreed to teach him, he can only express his respect to his new master. Sava calls him a stubborn fool, and even obstinate, but eventually gives in and agrees to teach him. Savu gets up from the ground and assures him not to misunderstand him, as he is only teaching him because the Devil's Palace ordered him to. Then he introduces himself again as Master Sava of the Wandering Beast Pavilion, and asks to be called Master Sa from now on. Insol tries to introduce himself, but he interrupts him, saying that he is not interested in his name, and while he is learning from him, he is simply student number 1. Then Sava immediately begins training. His fingers were blue with energy, and his whole body was glowing with an aura. Then he quickly strikes the main character under the eyes, causing them to go blank and the world to become increasingly blurred. Unsul suddenly finds himself in complete darkness and realizes that he cannot see anything. Savu tells him that he has temporarily sealed his vision using the secret techniques of the Wandering Night Pavilion. He explains that this is a necessary step in learning the way of the Wandering Beast, a basic technique that sharpens all the senses and gives the practitioner animal-like reflexes. He adds that their martial arts are different from others because they change dramatically depending on who studies them, and for this reason, mastering the basic technique is very difficult, which has led to a decline in the number of people attempting to master it until the pavilion reached its current deplorable state. But he assures him that if he can master it, he will gain the senses of the Wandering Beast, and shows him what abilities he himself has now, and then adds with a sarcastic smile that most people die before reaching this point. He came even closer to him. Sava tells him that he must get used to the darkness for about an hour, and that he will return to him then. All this time, the smile never left his face. A moment later, Unsul finds himself alone in the darkness and notices that his other senses have not sharpened as he expected. He realizes that an hour is a very long time, and that he must adapt as quickly as possible. But his eyes were still empty. He couldn't see anything. He just tried to get out of this state, constantly stumbling over something in the real world and falling. He thinks that countless fighters are competing to become one of the 10 demon lords, and that if he is attacked in this state, he will be completely helpless. At that moment, the attacker was silently behind him and tried to kill him with a sword strike from above, but Unsul dodges it with an instinctive movement and fell to the ground with a loud crash, feeling the waves from the blow spread around him. At that moment, Unsul realized that with his loss of sight, his balance was now the most important thing. Then the scene shifts in time. Night has fallen. And at night, Sava returns to Unsul and sarcastically thinks that this young man must be completely confused now. But upon approaching, Master Sava discovers the hero in motion, observes Unsul's training, and finds his method unique. He thinks that most students wait patiently for their other senses to resume functioning after losing their sight. But unlike them, Unsul moves fiercely, imagining a phantom enemy for training. Unsul moves smoothly in the darkness, gaining momentum and striking while jumping, as well as doing rolls, kicks, and much more. Sava concludes that this is the reason for his quick adaptation to the new situation. Approaching the young man, he remarks aloud that Unsul seems to have already gotten used to the darkness, and then, with a look of madness on his face, he reaches back and invites him to try to dodge his sword, and in an instant, the blade cuts through the darkness. After 3 days of continuous and intense training in the rain, Unsul was still training with Sava. He fell to the ground in the mud. Then he tried to get up, but the master was still there. The training had not exhausted him. Savu immediately surprises him with his incredibly fast movement and strikes Unsul in the stomach with the hilt of his sword, which Unsul is unable to dodge. Savu thinks about the situation and decides that 3 days have passed and it's time for Unsul to start doubting his training style. But he accepts everything without question. Poor boy. He is beaten and trembling. Savu stops attacking and asks him why he is not interested in how to avoid attacks or the theory behind the training. Unsul replies that he remembers him saying that the essence of the arts of the Wandering Night Pavilion is to achieve enlightenment on one's own. So he assumed there was a reason for his actions. Savu is surprised by his answer, chuckling slightly, and then he proudly admits that he is right, after which he enthusiastically tells him to continue training, his aura seeming to become even more intense than before. During training, Unsul reaches a new stage of awareness and feels that he can see the path of the approaching sword, but also realizes that he will not be able to dodge the next attack, so he decides to block it instead. Their swords clash with new force, and Unsul manages to block Sava's attack, which surprises him. Beads of sweat on the protagonist's face turn into crystals, and his teacher was extremely shocked by this situation. He kept wondering how he was able to block his silent sword attack. How did he do it in just 3 days of training? A moment later, Unsul falls to the ground and tries to stop his fall with his sword. Finally, falling on his back, he was completely exhausted and noted that he couldn't even block the blow properly. Savu approached him, offered him a drink from a bamboo flask, and Unsul thanked him. He quickly opened it and brought it to his mouth. Unsul drinks and is surprised that it is not water, as he feels enormous energy flowing through his body, as if the blood he had lost was returning to him. Savu tells him that it is the highest spiritual spring water, which he has been collecting all his life, but he does not feel that he is wasting it on him. That was not the case at all. Savu thinks to himself with great excitement that he has finally met the genius he has been waiting for his whole life. A precious, uncut diamond. At another time, Unsol's training continues. Their swords clashed harder and harder each time, generating a lot of light and sparks. The master really liked this and smiled. Savu suggests that he try to block his attack again. Savu continues to attack Unsol with strong and consistent sword strikes, but Unsol struggles to dodge the attacks. Suddenly, Sava appeared behind Unsol, expressing his dissatisfaction with his defensive actions. The boy turned sharply to defend himself, but suddenly Sava stops attacking, causing Unsol to breathe heavily and wondered why he had stopped. Why wasn't he attacking anymore? Then Sava bursts out laughing, announcing that he has finally found what he has been looking for all this time. At that moment, the seal on Unsol's eyes falls away. His eyes are filled with light again, and his vision returns. Sava addresses Unsol by his full name and suggests that he forget about becoming one of the 10 demon lords, and instead become an official disciple in his pavilion. He promises him that if he does so, within 10 years he will make him one of the 10 strongest martial arts masters in the demonic sect. Unsol considers the offer and realizes that Sava is probably not lying about his promise, but he remembers that his grandfather's killer is very skilled and comes to the conclusion that he cannot be satisfied with learning only the martial arts of the Wandering Beast Pavilion. Accordingly, Unsol announces his firm decision to become the Lord of Demons. Savu is completely shocked by this statement. His eyes almost pop out of his head. Then he crushed his ambitions and told him to forget about it if his goal was to learn the arts of all 10 demonic sects, because even the great heavenly demon couldn't do that. He explains to him that each martial art is suited to a specific body type and energy type, and that no matter how talented a person is, they cannot learn more than 2 or 3 types of martial arts, and that focusing on one martial art is the fastest way to become the strongest. Unsol apologizes for his stubbornness and bows before his master, while Sava wonders if there is a way to change Unsol's mind. Without waiting for an answer, he sighs heavily. In the end, Sava gives in and agrees to teach him another martial art. Unsol is surprised by this, explaining that he has only learned the basics of the Wandering Beast Pavilion. But Sava instantly surprises Unsol with a quick and decisive attack, but Unsol manages to block the blow on his own. Sava reveals to him that the martial arts of his pavilion are not only transmitted through steps or theories, and that Unsol has actually been practicing his pavilion's way of the wild beast all this time. Unsol then realizes that all the sword strikes that Sava directed at him were not just training, but true forms of the way of the wild beast. Unsol thanks his master, but Sava refuses his gratitude, insisting that he was following the orders of the Devil's Palace. Unsol insists on his gratitude, reminding him of the elixir he gave him, and promises that he will never forget his kindness. Sava quickly and decisively tells him to forget about it. The young man does not quite understand what the master means, and why it is better for him to forget. Savu explains that this is the nature of the world of Jianghu martial arts, where forgetting favors and grudges is always the best option. Then, after a long minute of silence and reflection, Unsol bowed to his master and told him he was leaving. Now Sava watches from afar as Unsol leaves, and wonders in amazement where such a talented person came from, and thinks that a bloody storm will soon sweep across Hell Island. Something great is coming. Unsol thinks about his ability to perceive, gained from studying the way of the Wandering Beast, which has made his senses extremely sharp. But he sees that this constant awareness is very tiring, even when he is doing nothing, and feels that he will not be able to rest properly if the situation continues in the same vein. Therefore, he decides that he must learn to control his senses and suppress them as much as possible. Unsol begins to concentrate, trying to control his senses, as if stopping a drop of dew falling from the grass. And after a few moments, he opens his eyes, feeling that this control is enough for now. The world around him finally began to resemble normalcy, and he no longer felt what he did not need. Then Unsol takes out a map, looks at it, and thinks that the Devil's Palace will not keep the students on Hell Island for long, especially just to train them endlessly. He concludes that their time is about to run out, and if that is the case, he has no other choice. He hides the map. Unsol decides to head to the strongest sect among the 10 demon sects, the Sword of Fire sect, founded by the Emperor of the Sword of Fire sect, Ju Wun, who was the rival of the greatest heavenly emperor of demons 700 years ago. Upon arriving at the Sword of Fire sect, Unsul discovers that their martial arts hall looks like a majestic palace compared to the modest Wandering Beast Pavilion. When he approaches the door and knocks, a man opens it and wonders who this visitor is at such an hour. The man immediately realizes who it is, and a bead of sweat appears on his forehead. Unsul realizes that this is the martial arts instructor for this sect, and he bows respectfully, announcing that he has come to study their martial arts. The instructor asks him to follow him and explains that their sword art is the most extensive of all demonic arts, but it is also the most labor-intensive. He adds that those who arrived half a month ago have already completed the initial test and moved on to the intermediate one, and then asks him why he is so late. Unsul tells him that he has been studying martial arts at the Wandering Beast Pavilion for the past half month. The instructor is surprised and asks him if he means that he has mastered the way of the Wandering Beast, and Unsul confirms this. The instructor thinks to himself that he knows this boy is a genius, but it is impossible for him to have mastered the way of the Wandering Beast in just half a month. He concludes that Sava must have gotten angry with him and quickly sent him away, and he sees that there is nothing he can do about it. After that, he introduces himself, saying that his name is Jinga, and he is in charge of the beginner's test and asks to be called teacher. Jinak asks Unsul if he really intends to study the art of the Fire Dominion sword, suggesting that he might be better off taking another test. Unsul thanks him for his concern, but insists on learning the arts of the Fire Lord sword sect. Jingak agrees to his request and raises his leg. Then he strikes the floor with such force that shockwaves ripple around him. He then shows him a large scroll, explaining that it is the introductory form and practical method of the 13 forms of fire rain, and asks him to study it and practice on his own. Unsul looks confused and wonders what he is supposed to do with it. Jingak turns away disapprovingly and asks him if he means that he cannot read the sword manual, and his face changes dramatically in the next second, as Unsul admits that he cannot, explaining that he never learned fencing before coming here. Jingak freezes in shock, then asks Unsul again to make sure it's true that he never learned fencing in his entire life. He thinks to himself that his records do indeed indicate that he has only used fire mastery until now, and that even in the second test, he did not use a specific sword style, but he still finds it hard to believe that he cannot perform even the most basic fundamentals, sword steps. On the other hand, he recalls his amazing observation skills and quick reflexes during the second test, as well as the insight he showed in choosing his cave. Jinak realizes that if he has reached this level while still a complete blank slate, then with the right training, his potential will be enormous. He will become a very great master and warrior. Jingak changes his strategy and assumes that even if he cannot see the sword's movements, he can read, and asks him to read what is written on the scroll. Unsul reads the words aloud: complete relaxation of the body, smooth flow as a whole, and then repeats the first part about relaxing the body. Jingak explains to him that this means he must relax and use his body flexibly when performing fencing techniques, paying particular attention to relaxing his torso and waist. Unsul tries to apply the instructions and bends into a strange posture, and Jingak thinks it is ironic that he has to teach such basics in a place intended for selecting the 10 demon lords. He asks him to stand up properly again and corrects his posture, explaining that when his body is tense, his torso is also tense, and that he must control his mind and relax it so that everything flows smoothly in one movement. Unsul responds immediately, and his stance stabilizes. Jingak is surprised at the speed of his understanding and correction of his posture as soon as he spoke. With a satisfied smile, he tells him that his stance is now sufficient, and that he will immediately teach him the 13 forms of fire rain. Jingak begins to explain the movements to him. Then he showed him hand-to-hand combat, and how to breathe during breathing. Then they worked on his endurance in combat. Then the master taught him again how to hold the sword correctly. And now he was ready. He took the sword in his hands and pointed it forward. His stance was flawless, and his strikes were like waves, smooth and deadly. Unsul imitated all the movements with astonishing accuracy and speed. Jingak confirmed his suspicions and realized that this boy was truly talented. After the training session, he told him that now he had to imagine an enemy in front of him and use the 13 forms of fiery rain, explaining that this was a test that would allow him to move on to the middle hall, and that his goal was to see the intention of the sword inherent in his basic movements. Unsul realizes that the opportunity he has been waiting for has come sooner than he expected, and that he must prove himself here and now. The young man immediately assumes a stance. He closes his eyes and concentrates, imagining the enemy he must defeat. This bastard stood before him, perhaps one of his enemies, or perhaps his grandfather's killer. He suddenly opens his eyes and draws his sword from its sheath, and then unleashes the first technique of the 13 forms of fiery rain, the incomparable cyclone. Shingok watches him with interest, while Unsol continues with the second and third techniques, floating misty clouds. He literally crushed his opponent with his pressure and blows, leaving his imaginary enemy no chance. Jinguk watches in amazement and wonders if what he is seeing is really the forms of fiery rain. He recalls that the technique of floating mist clouds should be a soft and graceful sword technique, similar in its movement to the movement of clouds and the spread of mist. But the way Unsol uses it is strangely sharp and deadly. Each blow literally cut into the flesh and tore it to pieces. A true demon. Jinguk wonders with surprise whether Unsol is consciously changing his movements, since changing the basic movements of a sword technique passed down from generation to generation is something only a great master can do. He notes that these altered sword movements are filled with a fierce intent to kill, as if he were facing the enemy of his master or parents. He thinks that the fighting style of the Fire Rain sword sect, which is considered the orthodox path among the ways of the sword, has changed so radically, and wonders what kind of life Unsol has lived to carry all this within himself. At the same time, Unsol also feels strange, as he notices that the flow at his fingertips changes the sword's path at his will. He wonders if the way of the wandering beast is the reason for this, and realizes that the more he uses the forms of the fire rain, the sharper the senses he acquired from the path of the wandering beast become. He thinks about completely combining the two styles, but hesitates, realizing that if he does so, it will result in a completely different fencing style, rather than the 13 forms of fire rain required for the test. He decides that he must hurry and return to the basics of the original sword. Suddenly, his eyes widen and he freezes in place for a moment. Suddenly, the image of the enemy in his mind becomes clearer, and he freezes when he realizes that it is the bastard who killed his grandfather. Unsol's anger flares up, his eyes become wild again, and the guy realizes that nothing can stop him now. His teeth grind like metal, and he lunges forward with all his might, unleashing the 7th technique. From the 13 forms of fiery rain, the heart of the 4 seas, he launches a furious attack, but his opponent unexpectedly dodged it. How did he manage to do that? His eyes widened again. This battle was no longer 100% imaginary. Unsol realized that his imaginary opponent was faster than anyone he had fought before. Then he began to imagine how the enemy would attack him, and now the bastard's blade was aimed straight at the protagonist's neck, but he managed to dodge at the last moment, nearly losing everything below his head. The guy noticed that this bastard wasn't giving him a second to catch his breath. He decides that he cannot give him a single opportunity to attack, and that he must use all the techniques he has left at once. He put all his strength into the attack, delivering a series of crushing blows, but his opponent blocks all his attacks and just looks at him smiling, and then delivers another of his signature blows and chops off the main character's arms. Something familiar. Unsol imagines an attack that cuts off both his arms, unable to dodge or even block the blow. After the attack is over, Unsol stands, breathing heavily, completely drained of energy. The sword falls from his trembling and exhausted hands. Gengok watches him and thinks that in the end he has lost to his enemy, and that made him very happy. He is not like the others at all. He approaches the boy and tells him that he has passed the test, and the boy looks at him in confusion. Gengok explains that the initial hall tests the student's understanding of the sword and his ability to perform the 13 forms of fire rain in real combat, and he assures him that the boy has definitely proven himself. He returns his sword and says that his execution of the fire rain forms was impressive, and invites him to proceed to the middle hall. Another victory for the main character. Unsol thinks about Master Gengaku and realizes that it must have been frustrating for him to teach someone who knew nothing about fencing. But he taught him anyway, and showed him everything, step by step. Unsol thanks instructor Gangake for all the time he spent with him, and the latter smiles and encourages him to work even harder in the future. Then he adds a warning, telling him to be careful, because his sword carries a particularly strong intention to kill, and he must not allow that intention to take hold of him. The young man immediately understands what his master is talking about, and this confuses him. In the end, Unsol bows respectfully and leaves. And then Gengok fully realizes that he was telling the truth and had indeed mastered the way of the wandering beast in just 2 weeks. He thinks that perhaps because of his incredibly fast learning speed, he moved to the middle hall much faster than he expected. He admits to himself that at first he wasn't sure if he would be able to enter the middle hall, but now he is absolutely certain. When Unsol opens the doors to the next hall, Gangok thinks about what path awaits the main character. He thinks about his new class and master, the intermediate hall instructor, Chung Wanghan, and assumes that although Wanghan may reject Unsul, he will ultimately become obsessed with him. And then, the Unsul enters the middle hall, and instructor Wanghan notices him and addresses him, saying that it seems he has just passed the beginner's hall. He then mocks him, adding that if it took him more than 20 days to understand the 30 forms of Huawu, then he is wasting his time here. Unsul explains that he was late because he spent the first 15 days in the Nangya Pavilion. Wang Gong concludes from his words that he is claiming that his time in the beginner's hall was not actually slow, and thinks contemptuously to himself that he must be one of those who ran away while trying to master the difficult path of the beast. Wangan orders him to sit down, expressing his doubt about his ability to keep up with the others. Wangan begins the lesson by explaining that the Thunder Fire Rain sword consists of quick movements, and that those who are not skilled with the sword will ultimately injure themselves. He adds that this martial art is difficult to use in real combat, as are the 13 forms of fire rain, and it is just a basic martial art that they must learn at this stage. He emphasizes that their main focus will be on honing their sword skills rather than on winning. He then asks one of the students, named Bayok Han Xiang, to come forward and choose an opponent for a duel. Han Xiang asks if he is free to choose anyone, and the instructor confirms this. So Han Xiang, with a sly, nasty grin, points directly right at the main character, Wensu. He shouldn't have gone there. Wang Gun tries to object, but Han Xiang reminds him that he said he could choose anyone. Wang Gun is angry and calls Han Xiang a fool, wondering how he expects to test his sword against someone who has just finished training in the elementary hall, and orders him to choose someone else. Unsul intervenes, saying that he doesn't mind and will fight him. The master thought he had misheard, but the protagonist resolutely agreed to fight this upstart. He explains that he learned to wield a sword from instructor Jingak, and believes he will learn faster if he tests his sword in battle with others. Wangan thinks that Unsul is just trying to protect his pride with his limited skills, but publicly agrees, saying that knowing one's own abilities is a necessary skill, and he hopes that Unsul is skilled enough to reach the advanced hall. Han Xiang sees this as a great opportunity to stand out among the geniuses. If he kills this newcomer, he will be able to establish his position. In the next moment, the two opponents stand face to face in the center of the hall, and Han Xiang tells Unsul that he has courage, since he decided to come out after all. But he needs more than that to survive in the world of murim. His eyes reveal madness and recklessness. The sword is wooden. The master gave the command, and the duel began. It began with Han Xiang's fierce attack, but Unsul skillfully dodged it. Han Xiang continued his attack, saying that this move had greatly impressed him, and at that moment he struck hard from above, their swords clashing powerfully. During this clash, Han Xiang senses the weakness of Unsul's resistance, and with a sarcastic smile, he realizes that he is indeed a complete novice. Han Xiang laughs loudly, mocking his foolish opponent, and then announces that he will show him the true sword of thunderous fire rain. Han Xiang launches a series of quick attacks, but his joy quickly fades. He was surprised that Unsul easily dodged all his blows. Now this bastard no longer felt such superiority over the main character. From a distance, instructor Wang Han observes the situation and thinks that Byuk Han Xiang is not skilled with the sword. Unlike him, he notices that Unsul not only quickly dodges blows, but also seems to predict every move, which makes him suspect that he has studied the way of the Wandering Beast. Wangan dismisses this thought, realizing that although the way of the Wandering Beast is the main martial art of the Wandering Beast Pavilion, it is extremely complex and can only be mastered by the most skilled master, and it is impossible for anyone, even a genius gifted by heaven, to learn it in just 2 weeks. Wangan decides that he cannot judge Unsul's skills based solely on his evasions, and that this duel is intended to test his sword skills, not his reflexes. Unsul immediately stops dodging and assumes the stance he learned earlier. Then he slightly covers his eyes, just like in training. He begins to counterattack, using 13 forms of fiery rain, which shocks the other students. Han Xiang mocks his opponent for also knowing how to use beginner techniques, and thinks he can dodge it with his eyes closed. But then someone in the crowd notices that Unsu's version of the technique is slightly different. Han Xiang is surprised when Unsul's strike breaks through his defense and hits him. He doesn't understand. What was that? Why is his hair now blowing in the wind? And while the main character was delivering multiple blows to Han's body, he didn't understand. Were these really the techniques they had studied? Han Xiang becomes enraged, wondering if Unsul has been hiding his skills all this time, and using a modified version of the forms to mock him. He guesses that Unsul is doing all this to attract the instructor's attention and immediately move on to the advanced hall. Han Xiang realizes that if the situation continues in the same vein, he will be the one who looks like a fool. He immediately clenched his teeth tightly and then shouted in anger, declaring that he would be the one to go to the advanced hall, and unleashed his clan's sword style, the Asura sword style, using its deadly technique, the blood-crushing strike. Instructor Wang Gan noted that this was a deadly technique from the Asura sword sect, but he did not forbid others from using it. But still, the instructor was impressed by Unsul's composure, as he did not lose his balance in such a situation, which makes him reconsider the possibility. He had truly mastered the way of the wandering beast. Apparently, this was indeed the case. Han Xiang continues his furious attack, shouting that this is the end of Unsul. He would never dare to let some newbie make him look like a fool. The instructor immediately frowns, realizing what is about to happen. Han immediately uses his special technique, the defensive bloody moon of wind. The main character puts his weapon up to block, and the two swords collide in a powerful explosion of energy. The remaining students are simply shocked, and the instructor looks on in shock, while Unsul recalls how he used the 13th and final form of the fire rain forms, infinite and boundless. The duel ends with Han Xiang falling to the ground, blood flowing from his mouth. He falls right next to the main character, who stood completely unharmed, and looked at his opponent, the man who wanted to stand in his way to his goal. The disciples watched in horror, and the perceptive one too, and now they all asked in horror, "Is Han dead?" Unsul calmly sheathes his sword. Instructor Wang Gan confirms to himself that Han Xiang is indeed dead. After all, he received a precise blow to a vital point. Wang Gan asks Unsul if he has always been a student of the Wandering Knight's Pavilion, and Unsul denies it. The instructor asks again, puzzled, whether he claims to have fully mastered the way of the Wandering Beast in just 2 weeks, and Unsul replies that he has only learned the basics. Wang Gan smirks at his answer, sarcastically asking if the Wandering Knight Pavilion teaches its students to lie these days. Unsul begins to speak, but the instructor interrupts him, saying he doesn't need excuses, and orders him to remove the body immediately. The students whisper among themselves, expressing their shock at the murder that occurred during a training match, and wondering why the perpetrator is not being punished. Wang Gan yells at them to be quiet and reminds them that this is Hell Island, not a regular training hall, and that anyone who uses lethal techniques must be prepared to die themselves. Then he announces the resumption of the test. Several more fights take place, and after they are over, Wang Gan gathers the defeated students and tells them that they have failed the test and must leave immediately to find another martial arts hall. One of them protests, saying that it was only one match and they ask for another chance, but Wang Gan flatly refuses. He explains to them that they may have passed the initial tests because of their physical training, but learning the Fire Lord's sword requires talent and potential, as well as blood, sweat, and tears to overcome their own limits. He tells them that they have failed because they lack these qualities, and then orders them to leave. The failed students leave, out of sight. But the instructor notices something interesting, because now only Unsul remains in the hall. Wang Gan asks him why he didn't leave, and Unsul asks if he should leave too. The instructor explains that he won the duel and passed the test, so he must move on to the advanced test. Unsul replies that if he needs to move on to a higher level, he would prefer to stay here. Wang Gan asks him the reason for his decision, and Unsul explains that the only sword technique he has learned is the 13 forms of fire rain, and that he has not yet learned anything in the middle hall. Wang Gan thinks that Unsul has learned the way of the Wandering Beast and exposed the techniques of the Asura sword sect, yet he claims to have learned nothing. The boy agrees with him, saying there is nothing to be done. Wang Gan agrees to teach him the Thunder Fire Rain sword technique, which is considered a continuation of the 13 forms of fire rain. But he warns him sharply that he hates petty tricks aimed at attracting attention, and that if he sees him using any sword technique other than the fire rain forms, he will immediately cut off his head. His statement was completely serious. 4 days passed, and the instructor stood with the same grim expression, but now not as stern and confident. After all, during those 4 days, he discovered that the guy really had no skills in fencing. And then the fact that the guy was holding a sword in his hand for the first time in a fighting stance surprised him even more. So much ambition, so much talent, so much desire. He was shocked by how hard the boy was trying. Every strike was perfect. Everything was done as if he would die for a mistake. Wang Gan smiled to himself, now understanding how Unsul was able to master the way of the Wandering Beast in just 2 weeks. Unsul immediately began training, practicing the piercing lightning technique from the thunder fire rain sword. After a short time, Wang Gan stops him, and the boy looks at the master in shock, who says that it seems he has already grasped the principles of the technique. And Unsul looks at him in confusion. Wang Gan explains to Unsul that the thunder fire rain sword is a technique based on quickly twisting the body for a sequence of movements, adding that all of his movements involve swinging the sword around his body, which makes them impractical in real combat. Despite this, Wang Gan notices that Unsul is trying to use every technique in practice, as if trying to kill someone. Unsul asks if that is not the purpose of sword techniques. The instructor replies that demonic martial arts require the intention to kill, but in order to achieve a higher level of mastery, the sword of fire domination renounces the aspect of killing. Wang Gan warns Unsul that if he cannot rid his mind of the intention to kill, he will ultimately create a martial art that will harm himself. Unsul realizes that the instructor is saying the same thing as instructor Jinga. Wang Gan admits that in the past, and even now, he too has lived with the intention to kill in his heart and killed everyone who stood in his way. Absolutely everyone. He slaughtered people by the city. But because of this, he lost his honor and pride, and his martial arts skills deteriorated. Wang Gan advises Unsul that techniques aimed at killing may seem like a path to a higher level, but in fact they are an obstacle on the endless path of fencing, and he must abandon his intention to kill. Unsul recalls his grandfather's words, that those who use swords often have a past full of despair and tragedy, and that is why the people of Murima hate to talk about their past. His grandfather always seemed to him to be such a wise man who knew everything in the world. Unsul asks why he is telling him all this, and Wang Gan replies that he has already told him because he too has lived with murder in his heart. Wang Gan asks for Unsul's name, and he replies, Bo Unsul. Wang Gan realizes that this is the young man that Jingok mentioned, who survived the second test, and tells him that he has a big problem. He explains that this problem is quite a big one. The guy didn't understand at first, so he asked, what kind of problem? Then the instructor says that the problem is that he has no foundation in martial arts. He explains that his opponents have been studying martial arts since they were young, and that if he wants to start learning the Fire Lord's sword properly in the advanced hall, the gap between him and them will only widen. Therefore, he needed to quickly master the basic martial arts in order to lay a solid foundation and eliminate the difference in training and strength. Then the instructor's aura changes, and he offers to teach the young man a technique he created himself, Chongro Muzan. He said that while studying it, he made a mistake, and now all the nerves in his fingers were dulled. But he got off easy. The technique is so dangerous that it can simply leave you without a hand. He offers the guy a choice. Either take action and move on to the next stage, or remain here as a cripple. Unsul bows, remembering his main goal, revenge. Then he thanks the instructor and thinks to himself that he is ready to give even his soul for this opportunity. Finally, a month has passed since the guy learned this technique and left the middle hall. The instructor said that he had mastered it quickly, but still not as he had expected. But now the guy understands that having achieved all these abilities, he can pass the test. And now he has arrived at the third stage. Arriving at the advanced hall, the main character looked ahead and saw his new martial arts master there. Unsul senses a completely different aura and feels a different ferocity in the students. He notices that no one looks at him with contempt anymore and realizes that the reason for this is his killing of Byukhan-son. He thinks about the irony between his previous profession of cleaning up corpses, which was despised, and killing people with a sword, which is praised. The old instructor greets him, saying he has heard about him, and invites him to sit down because the lesson is about to begin. The instructor announces that since a new student has arrived, he will explain the central reading of the Fire Lord's sword in addition to the 7 teachings. He explains the basic principles. Strength must be balanced in every part of the body, focus on adopting a balanced posture, and so on. Unsul understands these principles and realizes that he would not have been able to comprehend them without studying advanced martial arts in the middle hall. The instructor ends the verbal lesson for today and asks Unsul to follow him. The young man's face did not reflect any of the history of this meeting. Unsul follows the instructor into a quiet garden. The instructor holds a branch with leaves and explains to Unsul that there is a level at which someone without a sword can defeat someone who has one, explaining that a person at this level no longer needs a physical sword to master the art of swordplay. Suddenly, the instructor attacks Unsul with the branch. The instructor stops abruptly and asks Unsul a hypothetical question. If he were suddenly attacked like this and did not have a sword, how would he respond using sword martial arts? He adds that while Unsul was in the middle hall, the students here studied Shining Mysticism, the first form of the Fire Rain sword, and now they are discussing its theoretical side. Then he warns him that if he doesn't understand his question, he won't teach him, and asks him to answer carefully. Unsu thinks about the question, if there were no sword in my hand, and then his eyes widened greatly, and he answers that he would use his opponent's sword. Unsu lunges forward, trying to snatch the branch from the instructor's hand, but the instructor calls his choice hasty, and the boy immediately flies away because the old man dodged. Unsul is surprised to find that the instructor is behind him in an instant. Then he tried to turn sharply and finish what he had started. Unsu tries to catch up with the instructor, but the latter easily dodges all his attempts. Unsul is upset that he can't even track his movements, and realizes that he must impress him here in order to remain in the advanced hall. He decides to use the way of the wandering beast to its fullest power to read the flow and direction of the instructor's movements. Unsul concentrates all his senses and makes another attack, and his hand is getting closer and closer to the branch. He is just a little bit away from touching at least the leaves, but the instructor uses his energy to throw Unsul back before he can grab the branch, knocking Unsul to the ground and rolling him a couple of meters. The instructor catches Unsul before he can get up and quickly grabs him by the shoulder, shaking him slightly. Then he laughs loudly, announcing that he has passed the test. Unsul asks in confusion how he passed if he couldn't even touch him. The instructor tells him that he will begin studying radiant mysticism tomorrow and asks him to come early in the morning before the others, and Unsul agrees. After Unsul leaves, the instructor looks at the branch in his hand, and at that moment, a couple of neatly cut leaves fall from it. This surprised the master even more. He had succeeded after all, and thinks to himself that a wolf cub remains a wolf after all. He smiles and says that he has high hopes for him. The sun immediately began to set, and it was time to speak. Later, after the lesson ended that day, Unsul decides to take a walk around Hell Island. He thinks about what happened in the second test, and how a fight could break out here at any moment. Suddenly, he senses the presence of several people nearby. He begins to count them, simply closing his eyes and using his new technique. He discovers 5 people coming out from behind the trees. They are coming straight towards him. It looks like there will be a duel or a 2-on-5 shootout. Their leader addresses him, saying that his actions have been strange since he arrived from the middle hall, and that they are going to teach him a lesson. Another adds that since Unsur started the killing, he shouldn't blame them for what's about to happen. The leader boasts that the 5 of them are geniuses among geniuses and are known as the 5 Summit Swords, and advises him to prepare himself well. Unsul thinks to himself that there is one more person. The leader of the 5 Summit Swords yells at Unsur, but suddenly falls dead in front of his shocked comrades. Behind him stood the killer, who had pierced the bastard with a stick. He fell dead, and now it was the turn of the rest of the gang. They looked at their amazing leader with interest. At that moment, a red-haired young man named Sojin-ha appeared and addressed Unsul with madness in his eyes. In madness, saying that they need to talk. The remaining members of the 5 Peak Swords are surprised by Jinha's appearance and ask him why he is there. Jinha orders them to leave, saying he has no business with losers like them. The guys immediately tense up, their balls shrinking to the size of atoms. His words anger them, but they decide to retreat, vowing to return later to take revenge. Unsul thinks this young man is strong, while Jinha calls them cowards. Jinha turns to Unsur and asks him directly whose side he is on. He thrusts his sword forward and asks his question even louder. The main character looked at him with slight confusion. Earlier, in the advanced training hall, the instructor tells his students that they have all learned the first technique of the Fire Rain Sword, but true mastery comes only when each of them makes this technique their own. He announces that it is time to see the fiery raindrops they have created. The instructor asks Unsul to begin and try out his technique. Unsur steps forward, very confidently, and then takes a deep breath, concentrating before the strike. His face contorts with a grimace of rage from the concentration, and he is ready. And yet he demonstrated his own version of the technique, giving a powerful demonstration of fast and deadly sword movements, leaving behind a pile of deep cuts all over the training hall. The instructor comments that Unsul's technique is very solid and precise, and that he has filled it with the intention to kill. He allows him to return to his place, and then calls Sojin-ha. Jinha immediately gets up from his seat and steps forward, passing the main character. And instead of performing the first technique of the Fire Rain Sword, he demonstrates a completely different technique, one the main character has never seen before. The guy's eyes widened, and he was about to show the technique in action. As it turned out, the technique seemed to have been specially designed to counter and quickly and decisively defeat Unsul's technique. With each strike, the guy could take the main character's life. Unsul realizes that this was a warning directed at him. Returning to their confrontation, he again wonders about the meaning of Jinha's question, about whose side he is on. Jinha yells at Unsul, demanding that he stop playing dumb. He thinks he knows that not everyone here wants to become one of the 10 demon lords. He realizes that while the opportunity to learn the arts of the 10 demon sects is amazing, the process of participating in the competition was terribly organized. He concludes that this amazing opportunity is also a trap. Unsul finishes his thought, realizing that this opportunity is also a trap to catch something. He wonders if there is a spy among them, but decides not to worry about it. Jinha notices from Unsul's expression and tone of voice that he is not actually lying and does not understand what is going on around him. Jinha realizes that the person he is looking for is not Unsul. He feels disappointed because he was hoping for some fun and orders Unsul to stop acting annoying from now on. Then he threatens him that if he continues to get on his nerves, he will kill him too, and then leaves, while the guy watches him go. Unsul concludes that Jinha must be a spy, and that there is much more going on beneath the surface than he expected. Whether he is a spy or a demonic martial arts master, he is ultimately an enemy he must fight. As the sun sets, he thinks that it will all begin soon. Not far away, a mouse lived peacefully and ate cheese, and then it fell into the trap of a cunning bird. And that was the end of the mouse. And the bird carried us back to the palace training hall. In the training hall, the instructor announces that this day marks the end of training for today. He admits that he is sure many were bored while studying the laws, but explains that even the most skilled masters who fought in countless battles set aside time to study the laws and principles of martial arts. He adds that knowledge of martial arts does not mean the ability to perform it, and that skill does not mean true understanding. He expresses his belief that analyzing the laws he has taught them will serve as a starting point in their journey in the world of murim, and then wishes them luck. Suddenly, a bell rings, and a voice is heard everywhere. All the students are puzzled. What is going on? The instructor announces that the time has come, and orders everyone to head to Rocky Mountain in the center of the island. The students gather at the mountain, where the chief instructor, Hyuk Ryong-yeon, confirms that everyone has arrived. All the students are already here. The main character seemed dissatisfied with something and just stood there with that look on his face. And the chief instructor begins his speech. Speaking passionately and frantically, he announces that their third trial will begin at that moment. All the participants did not understand. Why the third and not the second? And whether the main character knew that it was a fight to the death, which he had gone through in the second trial. The second organizer said that soon all the Ks would be sealed until 10 candidates were selected, so they needed to prepare everything they needed in advance. Everyone was in shock. One of the participants raised his hand and asked what the trials would consist of and how the candidates would be selected. The second instructor began to explain, but the first and foremost interrupted him and said that only pathetic fools and cowards ask such questions. He simply waved his hand toward the huge crowd of students and told them only one phrase: to kill each other. Ryong-yeon announced the start of the third test and explained that they had to kill each other until only 10 of them remained. Some students were in complete shock, while others were fine with it. He tells them that they can hide or run as they please, but they won't be able to do so forever. Over time, the areas where they can stay will be limited, and anyone who ends up in a forbidden zone will be killed by the killing demons. Unsul senses a strong intention to kill coming from these demons, and realizes that they must be amazing martial artists. One of the students asks if they are allowed to attack the killing demons. Ryong-yeon laughs loudly, expressing his delight at seeing candidates with such high goals. He confirms that they can, of course, fight them, and even kill them if they can. He then reveals an amazing reward. Anyone who kills a killing demon will immediately become one of the 10 demon lords. The disciples realize that this means killing one demon is more difficult than killing all the other participants. Ryong-yeon reminds them that they can team up with each other or ambush each other, and shouts that they must kill at any cost if they want to, as this is the path to becoming one of the 10 demon lords. As soon as the test begins, the students scatter in all directions. Unsul runs quickly, realizing that he needs to move fast. He knows that he has attracted the attention of many students so far, and now he will have to try hard not to be the first to die. After all, if he doesn't leave immediately, there is a high probability that he will be attacked by a group, as has already happened. Unsul decides that first he must get to a safe place, and the safest place for him is the Wandering Beast Pavilion. He rushes at full speed toward the familiar building. On the way, he slows down slightly and switches from running to walking. He notices that the texture of the ground has changed significantly. Something is wrong here. He touches the ground with his hand and realizes something else. He turns sharply around, his eyes still reflecting calmness. But suddenly, he senses someone approaching, 3 warriors. A wounded young man appears, running and screaming for help, saying that someone is trying to kill him. The main character immediately reaches for his weapon, and he's right to do so. In this trial, he will have to kill. The young man offers to reward Yunsol if he helps him, and Yunsol wonders if this is a trick, but he sees that the young man's wounds are real. Yunsol senses 3 people following him and wonders if they are a team. He doesn't want to get involved, but he realizes that the young man's presence here will reveal his location. But the guy in front of him was so defenseless, shaking all over, looking so pathetic. And so, at the last moment, Yunsol drags the young man with him into a hidden hole in the ground. The 3 pursuers arrive at the scene and wonder where their prey has gone, insisting that he couldn't have escaped. The leader decides that he will definitely kill this bastard and orders his companions to move and search for him because he couldn't have gone far. After they leave, Yunsol pulls his head out of the ground and the young man also climbs out of the pit. The young man warmly thanks Yunsol, saying that he survived thanks to him. Yunsol thinks that this pit was not just for hiding, and that Master Savu must have prepared it especially for him. Yunsol recalls that when he was in the pit, he felt his senses as a wandering beast expand more than usual. He was able to sense the sound of them pushing the ground with their feet, and the sound of them using their swords, all through vibrations. He could perceive everything as if he were seeing it with his own eyes. Yunsol realizes that this is the way of the wandering beast, using vibrations, and that this is what Master Savu wanted to teach him. Then he turns to the young man. The young man introduces himself as Kim Choryong from the Blood Sect and asks his name. The young man ignores him and starts to walk away, and Choryong follows him, urging him to wait. Choryong explains that he ran away into the forest as soon as the 3rd test began, but they relentlessly pursued him. He asks Insu if he can join him, arguing that he feels that he is a trustworthy person because he helped him hide. Without waiting for an answer, he takes Insola's silence as consent and happily leaves with him. The boy looked at the main character with a smile and admiration. Suddenly, the sounds of a fierce battle could be heard in the distance. Yunsol senses this with his new vibration technique and tells his companion that there is a battle going on there and that they should find another way. Choryong is amazed by Unsol's ability to sense vibrations and asks him to teach him how to do it. The boy simply walks away from him in silence. Nearby, a lone fighter faces more than one opponent and swears to avenge his comrades, even if it means selling his soul. The word revenge echoes in Unsora's mind as he senses a familiar kind of hatred in this fighter. Choryong asks him what happened, why he suddenly changed so much in a second, and Yunsol announces a change of plans and that they will join the battle, which shocks Choryong. As Unsol advances toward the battle, he doesn't notice that some guy is already lying in wait for them in a tree, and soon he immediately struck the 2 guys who seemed defenseless to him. But the guy parried the sudden blow that was aimed at him. The bastard was surprised and wondered how Yunsol was able to stop the forbidden high technique of concealment, and asks him if he is also a professional assassin. But with a quick movement, Yunsol skillfully kills the assassin. Yunsol recalls how easily he dealt with one of the assassins and thinks that the concealment technique they use would have been very annoying if he had not studied the way of the wandering beast. Meanwhile, Choryong screams in horror at the sight of blood. The main character felt that the fighter thirsting for revenge was surrounded, and Unsor thought that if he helped this fighter get rid of the assassins, he might feel what it was like and tell him about the feeling of revenge being accomplished. The assassins decide to end it quickly, and one of them tells the fighter that he will kill him quickly, out of respect for the fact that he was the last one alive. But before he strikes, Unsol intervenes and blocks him. The assassins are shocked, wondering where this man came from and if there are more enemies. They decide to kill Yunsol as well. One of them was already behind them, but the guy quickly returned from him and slipped between the 2 fighters. A fierce battle ensues, and Yunsol kills one of them. While Yunsol and the vengeful fighter fight side by side against the assassins, Gigi tries and rushes with his sword from fighter to fighter, easily killing them with a single blow to vital points, and they finish them off, one by one. And then, when the main character slightly hesitates, the last assassin instantly rushes towards him, but suddenly blood splatters everywhere and the main character's face is completely covered in blood. For then the avenging fighter delivers the final blow to the last assassin. The blow was so strong that it cut the man in front of him in 2, and through the body you could see the face of the guy who was already running out of strength. He laughs madly, covered in blood, and whispers that he had finally taken his revenge, then falls to the ground. Right in front of the main character, there were now several corpses and one unconscious fighter. Choryong asks Unsol if it's all over now. At that moment, Choryong approaches Unsol and tells him that he is skilled, but must not let his guard down. Then he suddenly attacks him with a hidden dagger. The blade of the dagger glitters in the light, but is met by the blade of another sword. Even without looking at him, Eunso easily blocks the attack, and Choryong is stunned and puzzled as to how he was able to stop him. Eunso tells Choryong that it's all his fault, because it was his fault that he couldn't ask his last question to the vengeful fighter. Choryong asks in horror when he found out about him. Eunso replies that he knew from the beginning, and explains that when they were hiding underground, he realized that Choryong was hiding a set of weapons under his clothes. He adds that it was easy to notice because of how stiffly he moved his spine. Eunso reveals that the reason he kept him around despite everything was because he was curious to see what he would do. He thought that watching a person try to deceive others would be useful to him in the future. Choryong refuses to believe this and grits his teeth, insisting that his game was perfect. In a desperate move, he throws all his remaining hidden weapons at Eunso. Eunso easily dodges Choryong's attack. Choryong thinks to himself that he felt something strange while chasing him and wonders if Eunso can predict his movements. Eunso skillfully dodges all the hidden weapons thrown at him and then strikes Choryong. The blow hits his shoulder perfectly, releasing a huge amount of blood. Eunso tells him that even the best hidden weapons are useless if they are discovered. He raises his blades in the air, and the wounded fool can only growl furiously at the main character. Choryong lunges at Eunso in a last desperate attempt, but Eunso was unperturbed by such an opponent. The main character quickly ends the fight and finishes off Choryong. The guy dies instantly, leaving behind a pile of blood on all surfaces. And now the main character stood proudly in front of the bastard's body, putting his sword back in its sheath. Covered in blood, Eunso thinks that the fight was not easy and that it would have been dangerous if he had not known about the hidden weapon in advance. Then he turns back and watches as life leaves Choryong's body and notices on his face the same obsession with life he has seen in every dying person. Eunso leaves the scene and walks past the bodies of the assassins and the fighter who sought revenge. He stops at the latter's body, noticing that he is different. This man died with a smile on his face. Eunso wonders about the feeling of successful revenge, and whether he too would be able to smile like that when he took his revenge. This question haunts him. Eunso takes the dead assassin's swords and continues on his way with his new trophies. Once again, alone. From afar, one of the demon slayers watches Eunso and wonders if it was Eunso who did it. The space is filled with dirty green and black smoke. Another demon says that Eunso killed the professional assassins using only the basic techniques of the Fire Dominion sword sect. He admits that he is definitely talented, but adds that there are many others here who are just as talented as he is, and that if he doesn't improve, he won't be able to survive on Hell Island. The next day, Eunso runs very fast and almost suffocates. Earlier, he discovered that he was being pursued by a group of students. One of them used a metal whip, attacking from a distance. Eunso managed to dodge one of the attacks, but the weapon's trajectory changed in the air and hit him from behind. It hits him right in the back. The blow is very painful and will surely leave a huge wound on the protagonist's back. Eunso realizes that they will not back down, and that he will die quickly, unless he finds a way out of this predicament. Meanwhile, at the instructor's camp, the chief instructor stands on a skylight. He asks his assistant to report on the situation. The other tells him that out of 86 students, 41 are still alive. The chief instructor, Hyuk Ryong-yong, is surprised that so many have survived even after 3 days. He concludes that those who remain must be skilled and that it is time to truly test their skills. He asks his assistant to give him a map. Elsewhere on the island, swords clash, and one of the students is about to kill Eunso by unexpectedly snatching the sword from his hands. Eunso finds himself on the run from his pursuers once again. He thinks that the type of weapon they are using makes fighting in open terrain unsuitable for him, so he devises a plan that suits his situation. Meanwhile, the chief instructor, Hyuk Yong-young, looks at the map and decides to limit the combat zone. The main character keeps running, but suddenly a look of confusion appears on his face. The commander then orders the release of the demon slayers in the area of the Sword of Fire sect, the very building where the main character underwent multiple training sessions. Eunso heads straight for the building of the Sword of Fire sect, and behind him stretched a huge trail of blood. His pursuers also noticed it, leaving their iron whips for a second and thinking that the guy had definitely gone inside. His pursuers follow him inside. The pursuers wonder if he is hiding inside, and one of them mocks him for being cornered. Their leader thinks that no matter how fast he runs, he won't be able to get away from them. But suddenly he notices something and turns around sharply. At that moment, Eunso suddenly attacks them from behind. The leader calls him a fool, thinking it's a naive trick that they won't fall for. Eunso engages them in battle and takes his signature stance, skillfully dodging their weapon attacks. Dodging like a god. and even parrying all attacks with his sword. The leader is stunned and perplexed as to how this bastard can read the paths of their sword techniques. Gigi grips his sword tighter to deal with this upstart. He lunges forward at tremendous speed, running up to them and cutting the throat of one of the bastards with a single movement. He immediately fell to the floor, and the second guy was shocked by such blows. He didn't even notice that the main character was only a centimeter away from his face with his sword. He tried to swing his whip at him, but it hit the ceiling and he couldn't attack. Then the man noticed this and realized that this place was not at all suitable for their weapons. Yoon-sol had no intention of stopping. On the contrary, he took an even bigger swing for the blow and immediately chopped off the arm of the bastard standing in front of him in shock. Insol uses chaos and narrow corridors to his advantage. One of the pursuers realizes that this confined space weakens the power of their attacks, and before he can finish his thought, Yoon-sol kills him. In his final moments, the pursuer realizes that Yoon-sol deliberately lured them here. Yoon-sol thinks that his opponents are forced to shorten their attacks in this narrow space, which weakens their power and makes their movements more predictable. In addition, he notices that they are not very skilled. He concludes that he has a chance to defeat them if he fights them one-on-one. One of the pursuers shouts and attacks, but Yoon-sol dodges him. However, the whip unexpectedly bounces off the wall and hits Yoon-sol, breaking the window and causing him to lose his balance and fall to the ground. The guy realizes that this maneuver was not the best move of his life, and that his opponent is smart. One of the pursuers sees an opportunity and shouts to the others to move now and run away from this place. But before the pursuer can escape, he suddenly stops. Someone stopped him, coldly asking them what they were doing and whether they were running away. His aura was simply terrifying. He repeats his question loudly once more. Are these rats trying to escape from this place? One of them hesitantly replies that they didn't think it was a good idea to fight in that place. Moonchon is enraged by their cowardice and kills them all in the blink of an eye. Instead of people, there is just a bloody mess in front of him. Such is his love for his students. He thinks to himself with contempt that this is exactly why he hates working with losers who haven't even reached the advanced hall. Yoon-sol watches the scene from afar. After the fighter finishes off the rest of the pursuers, he turns to Eun-sol and asks him if he is their leader. The fighter praises Yoon-sol's skill and then asks him if the sword technique he used earlier was the fire rain sword. The assassin introduces himself as Woo Moon-chong and asks for Eun-sol's name. But just as Eun-sol is about to respond, Moon-chong laughs loudly, saying that he doesn't care about the name of someone who is about to die. Moon-chong fiercely attacks Eun-sol. He clearly did not expect such a sharp blow. Yoon-sol tries to block the attack, but the whip wraps around his sword and then easily breaks his sword. Moon-chong mocks him, saying that he heard that in the advanced hall of the Fire Rain Sword Sect, he was taught only one defensive technique. Yoon-sol is surprised and wonders how his opponent knows about shining mysticism and whether he has an information network that he knows nothing about. Moon-chong attacks him again, scolding him for getting lost in thought in the middle of a fight. He swings his iron whip like a lasso and then throws it at the main character. The battle between them intensifies, and Eun-sol realizes that his opponent is destroying everything in his path, and that there is no advantage in fighting someone like him in a confined space. Yoon-sol steps back to create some distance between them, but then the iron whip hits him again and pushes him back hard. Yoon-sol almost fell on his back because such a blow could have simply crushed his insides, but the guy managed to stay on his feet. He returned to his signature stance with his sword. Moon-chong slowly approached and expressed his disappointment. He also told Yoon-sol that with such skills, he was no match for him. Moon-chong unleashed a total attack on him with his chain weapon, luring Eun-sol into an iron web from all sides. Now he was truly trapped by all these parts and blades of the strange weapon. And the bastard laughed, because very soon, the white whip technique would kill the guy by simply squeezing him like a hydraulic press. Inside this iron sphere of blades, the guy realized that he didn't have enough defensive strength to block such an attack. In that case, he needed to find another solution. And he remembered his master from the fire pavilion. Strength and energy filled his body, and he gripped the sword's hilt more tightly. Suddenly, his eyes, overflowing with energy, opened a little wider. The bastard outside is shocked to see the guy still trying to get out. He sarcastically asks him if this is his last fight, believing that defensive techniques like radiant mysticism won't save him. But the sphere has already cracked. But he was stunned to see that Yoon-sol was still fighting. Then Yoon-sol managed to break free from the web that Moon-chong had woven with his weapon. It was an explosion of energy from the main character, with lightning striking after the sound wave. And the main character immediately rushed forward with his new lightning technique, capable of piercing steel Yun-Sol concentrates his energy and then unleashes a massive attack, which completely catches Moonchun off guard and breaks through his defense, leaving him in a state of shock. And then he cuts him to pieces. The main character's face was impassive. He wanted to kill this bastard who stood in his way, and the spirit gradually left the body of the cut-up master. Yun-Sol stands, breathing heavily after the battle, remembering how he repelled Moonchun's attack with a powerful burst of energy, unleashing the incomparable lightning and thunder technique, a destructive technique that completely annihilates his opponent. Yun-Sol thinks that this technique really does possess enormous power, just as the instructor said, but he coughs up blood, realizing that it is too advanced for his current level and that he cannot use it freely. He is glad that he won, but he sees that the battle took too long and that the restricted areas will soon change, so he must move on. Suddenly, he senses the presence of someone else and wonders why he is in this place and freezes in place, unable to believe what is happening, especially when he sees a figure in front of him, representing a killing demon. Yun-Sol wonders why the killing demon is here, and whether this area became off-limits during his fight. He comes to the conclusion that he ended up here not because he ran away from the fight, and wonders if they will let him leave peacefully. He sees that the demon is not responding, so he assumes he can leave. When Yun-Sol tries to walk past him, the guy doesn't feel anything at first, but the demon suddenly attacks him with a swift movement from behind. The guy was simply shocked by such power. Yun-Sol imagines that his neck will be cut if he can't dodge. He cannot allow such a ridiculous and simple death. He has not yet achieved all his goals. Yun-Sol dodges the attack at the last second and realizes that if it weren't for the path of the wandering beast, he would surely have died, since he didn't even sense his opponent's presence when he swung his sword. Yun-Sol prepares for confrontation and thinks that he should not be deceived by his opponent's calmness, and that if he tries to move even slightly, the demon will immediately attack him and kill him with a single blow without hesitation. Yun-Sol recalls the lesson he learned from Sava. When a predator hunts its prey, the prey is not easy to catch, even if the predator is faster. The reason for this is, the prey moves in a zigzag pattern, and they cannot figure out how to catch up with it. The master confirms his guesses, but says that sometimes animals get their way. Top predators always succeed in their hunt, because they attack at the moment when their prey is moving. Yun-Sol wonders how he can oppose such an opponent, and he thoughtfully recalls the rest of the lesson. Then he stops and starts shouting loudly, remembering that if a predator attacks based on timing, the solution is to make his movements completely unpredictable. Yun-Sol decides to apply this strategy. He starts by moving in a predictable zigzag pattern, then uses the path of a wandering beast to dodge expected attacks. Finally, he seizes the right moment and creates a breach in the enemy's defense with a completely unexpected move. But Yun-Sol is in shock. The killing demon freezes in front of him for a moment, and Yun-Sol thinks it's too late and he's doomed. The knife blade is already at his throat, but he is surprised when he sees that the demon stops attacking and turns to leave. Yun-Sol wonders why it stopped and whether he has crossed the boundary of the forbidden zone without realizing it. He thinks about the fight and realizes that he barely managed to dodge the attacks with all his might, but was unable to create a single breach in the enemy's defense. He admits to himself that this is the level of a true master, and that he was like a frog in a well, and leaves. After some time, the guy realizes how vast the world is and how powerful those in it are. He comes to the conclusion that the Demon Slayer's martial arts skills were at a level he couldn't even measure, and that his grandfather's killer undoubtedly possessed comparable skills. His determination grows stronger. He must surpass this level of skill if he wants revenge. Suddenly, another man appears before him and calls him by his full name, Yun-Sol of the Bo family. This man tells him that he has been looking for him for some time, and that he has heard that he has studied the way of the wandering beast. Yun-Sol thinks that this man speaks as if he knows him, like the others, which means that information about him has spread. The man in front of him begins to introduce himself, but then stops, sarcastically saying that someone who is about to die does not need to know his name, and then launches a sudden attack. Hasn't this happened before? Yun-Sol easily dodges the attack. The attacker is impressed by Yun-Sol's abilities, noting that he predicted the path of his attack with his animal senses. He tells him that he is sure that he will become one of the 10 demon lords in the future, and for that very reason, he must kill him now, while he is still a demon seed. Yun-Sol notices that his opponent's energy flow has completely changed. He also remembers the demon seed. He remembers that not everyone on the island aspires to become one of the 10 demon lords, and wonders if this man is one of them. He forces himself to get rid of distracting thoughts in order to focus on the fight, while holding back his older opponent's blow. Yun-Sol feels a strange sensation, a strange flow of energy pulling him toward it. He recalls his fight with this guy and analyzes it. At that time, the bastard easily dodged every blow from the main character. And even then, he felt this strange sucking force. Yun-sol recalls a lesson with his grandfather, where he explained that one of the bodies they were examining had been killed by 5 cutting tiger blades of the Heibi Feng clan. His grandfather knew this because, although there were no external wounds, all of the victim's bones were shattered, which is a distinctive feature of this technique, which works by transferring qi into the opponent's body with each collision. In the present, Yun-sol screams, realizing that the technique he has encountered is the 5 cutting tiger blades of the Heibi Feng clan. His opponent is stunned that he was able to recognize his style. Yun-sol recalls another characteristic of this technique, which his grandfather explained, a powerful absorption technique that acts like a whirlwind, pulling everything toward it, and they use it to control their opponent's weapon with every clash. Yun-sol continues to recall his grandfather's lesson, who explained that the Heibi Feng clan fights like a tiger, using the confusion of the enemy's sword to swallow it whole. Young Yun-sol asks his grandfather if this clan is the strongest, and his grandfather replies that the technique of absorption is a double-edged sword. Although it is deceptive, it forces its user to approach the enemy. In the present, Yun-sol decides to use this absorption technique to turn the enemy's sword against him. That's the cunning plan. His opponent, Feng Aka of the Heibi Feng clan, declares that he will now fight him with all seriousness, with the main character as his enemy, and swears in the name of his clan that he will eradicate this demon seed. When Feng Aka attacks, the hero bows. Yun-sol surprises him by plunging his sword into the ground, and Feng Aka is shocked by this unexpected move. Yun-sol uses the sword as a fulcrum to kick Feng Aka with all his might right in the hip joint and cause him to lose his balance. Finally, the hero landed on both feet and surveyed his work and realizes to himself that his plan is working. It worked! Feng Aka is angry and accuses Yun-sol of using dirty tricks. Yun-sol thinks the trick worked, but didn't do much damage, which makes sense because his opponent has been training for a long time. But now he knows how to counter him. Yun-sol remembers another lesson from his master. Wait for your opponent to attack first, because true speed lies in being a fraction of a second faster than him at the moment of collision. Yun-sol decides to use the energy absorption technique against him to become faster. Feng Aka attacks again, but Yun-sol decides not to resist the pulling force. Instead, he gives into it, using the momentum to accelerate his sword. And now he rushes at his opponent at tremendous speed, with his sword held out in front of him in a full fighting stance. Then, at the last moment, he changes the direction of his attack and lands a successful blow on Feng Aka. Feng Aka is shocked, wondering if Yun-sol has turned the energy absorption technique to his advantage. He considers this impossible, since his technique is strong enough to pull a stone from a distance, and even the most skilled swordsmen find it difficult to use such power accurately. He dismisses the idea that someone as young as Yun-sol could have done this and attacks him again in the same way. Yun-sol thinks that this makes no sense, because the stronger the absorption, the faster his sword becomes. And the main character attacks his dull opponent again with the same method. Feng Aka desperately shouts, asking how long, in Yun-sol's opinion, this tactic will work. Suddenly, Yun-sol notices that his opponent is no longer using the energy absorption technique. Feng Aka tells him that he doesn't need to use it to defeat someone like him. Feng Aka lunges forward at the main character in a direct attack. He was completely enraged and completely unaware of his actions. While Yun-sol thinks this is the moment he has been waiting for, Yun-sol prepares and uses the first technique of the Sword of Fire Domination, Radiant Mysticism. His whole body is surrounded by energy. He unleashes a powerful counterattack, taking advantage of the moment when his opponent has abandoned his defense, and delivers the finishing blow, Feng Aka. That's how they stood in the middle of the battlefield. The main character was at the limit of his abilities, while his opponent stood as if nothing had happened and everything was normal. Suddenly, the outline of a cut and blood appeared on his arm, and in the next second, the entire wound became visible. He had cut half of his body in half. Unable to stand any longer, Feng Aka fell to his knees and asks in shock if it was the technique of shining mysticism, and Yun-sol confirms it, saying that it was a dangerous move. Yun-sol thinks that in order to turn the only deadly move in the shining mysticism defense technique into a full-fledged attack, he had to deliberately direct all of his opponent's other attacks at himself. Feng Aka expresses his amazement, saying that he would never have thought to interpret this technique in such a way. He then asks Yun-sol if he is simply going to leave. Yun-sol replies that he is not part of his revenge. Feng Aka finds this interesting, wondering how someone like Ying Xiao could exist in a demonic cult. Yunso tells him that he hopes they will never see each other again, and then turns and walks away. Feng Ak falls from his injuries, falling right on his butt. It was very bad. And suddenly another man appears behind him, and Feng A asks him if he is here to kill him. The masked killing demon addresses Feng Ak, noting that he was very useful to someone from the righteous cult, and that his death is regrettable. Feng Ak realizes that they knew he was a spy from the beginning, and the demon tells him that he underestimates the devil's palace. Then he says goodbye and raises his sword, and kills him with a single slash. The scene shifts further to a completely different place on the island. One of the disciples ran for his life. Then he hides behind a tree to catch his breath and heal his wounds. We see how Sojin Ha pulls the tools stuck in his body out one by one. He throws them away randomly. He no longer needs them. Then he stands there, breathing heavily and wounded. A group of opponents appears before him, and their leader tells him that he is out of luck. He mocks him, asking if he really thinks he can escape after being poisoned with a special poison, Hell's Blood Fortress poison, and describes him as doomed if he does not have an antidote. Jinha curses his luck and thinks that he did not know about the existence of such an organized group using hidden weapons and poisons, and that there are limits to what he can do alone. His opponents notice that Jinha is holding a sword in his left hand and ask him if he intends to fight them with it. The leader tells him that even if he is talented, a right-handed swordsman cannot suddenly master his left hand, and advises him to surrender. Then they begin to attack him together. They throw swords, daggers, shuriken darts, whatever they can get their hands on at him. But Jinha fights them off with amazing skill, but they quickly wound his arm. Not very pleasant. He realizes that he has been hit by another poison needle. Damn bastards. And that if he doesn't get the antidote within 15 minutes, it will be all over for him. Surrounded and wounded, he begins to consider surrendering. Suddenly, Jinha hears a scream as her attackers are ambushed by an unknown assailant, who finishes them off one by one while they scream, asking who is attacking them. At the last moment, Eunsul intervenes and rescues Sojinha from the ambush. Taking the sword firmly in his hands, the main character moves forward. With quick and decisive movements, Eunsul eliminates all the attackers. Sojin looks on in shock as the main character repays his debt, leaving the bodies of his enemies scattered on the ground. Eunsul stands in the middle of this carnage and looks at the guy, while Jinha cautiously retreats and asks him to wait, assuring him that she has no ill intentions towards him. But instead of killing So, the main character searches the body of one of the attackers, finds a vial, and realizes that it is an antidote. She thinks that with this antidote, it will be easier for her to resist the other members of the Hellish Blood Fortress. When Yunsol turns to leave, Jinha asks him to wait again, and asks him what he wants from him. The guy tells him that he is poisoned, and has only 10 minutes before the poison spreads throughout his body. Yunsol coldly replies that he is mistaken, and explains that he came here to kill everyone, including him. She adds that the only reason she is letting him go is because she does not feel the need to kill him herself. Jinha admits that he will die if he leaves him, and that in the end, he is just another competitor to him. In a desperate attempt, he offers to work with him if he gives him the antidote. Yunsol is initially shocked, not understanding what is going on. Then, frowning, she asks him why he would do that. Jinha explains that there are only 20 people left, and that everyone except them belongs to groups. He says that no matter how strong he is, he cannot fight them all alone. He adds that if he works with him, he can provide him with information about their martial arts, and swears that he will never betray him if he saves his life. Yunsol considers this offer. Based on what he has seen in him so far, he concludes that, despite his pride and independent behavior, he does not seem like someone who would resort to deception or betrayal. He asks about the terms of the agreement, and he proposes that they work together until only the two of them remain, and they swear not to betray each other. After a moment's thought, and tears from the guy opposite, Yunsol finally takes out a bottle of liquid and throws the antidote right into his hands. And catching it, the guy thanks him, and while the guy is treating his wounds, Yunsol hears a strange sound and wonders if another restricted area has been created. He tells Jinha that they need to leave, but he replies that he doesn't think this area is forbidden. Yunsol urges him to think, explaining that most parts of the island have already become forbidden, and the appearance of a new restricted area now most likely means that the other participants will head here. Indeed, other groups of students begin to appear, and they begin to surround them, and Eunsul realizes that it is too late to run. After all the surviving teams and fighters were here, preparing to kill them. The guy stares at the crowd of rivals in front of him. One of the newcomers catches Yunso's attention, and he feels that this person is different from the others. One of the students suggests that everyone agree to kill Yunso and Jinha first. Another recognizes them, Bo Unsor, who has studied the way of the wandering beast, and So Jinha, who should not be underestimated for his sword skills and his investigations into other students. The leader of the opposing group thinks that now they know about Unso and So Jinha, and that he wondered why they didn't team up, and guesses that they are now working together. The guy looked at his new ally and saw the vial in his sleeve. Yunso remembers the vial of antidote powder he received, and Sojin tells Yunsor that he is using the poison from Hell's Blood Fortress, and that it will give them a chance. Jinha throws the powder into the air, and the enemies panic, believing it to be the Hell's Blood Fortress poison. Yunso and Jinha use this opportunity to escape. One of the opponents realizes that the powder is not poisonous, and that they have been tricked, and the leader orders them to pursue them. Jinha thinks that the powder creates thick smoke, which is good for deceiving the eyes. Jinha thinks that the open terrain is not to their advantage, and that they should head for the rock formations, where there are many small caves. Yunso asks him if he is thinking the same thing as him, and he replies that they need to find a cave to fight in, and Yunsol tells him that she knows one. He leads her to a cave with a narrow entrance and a long passageway. Jinha is amazed that he planned all this, and he finds it hard to believe that he just studied the path of a wandering beast, and he wonders about his true identity. And those idiots continue to chase after them. They rush at full speed, straight towards the rocky terrain. And when they arrive, Jinha notices a strange fog that wasn't there before, and Inso agrees with him that something strange is going on here. A killing demon emerges from the fog. Jinha is shocked to realize that these are killing demons, and that this is a forbidden zone. Yunso calmly notes that the demons are just observing the situation, and concludes that the instructors deliberately chose this place as a restricted area, because they were heading there. Jinha asks what they should do, and Inso replies that as long as they don't cross the border, the demons won't attack them. Yunsol adds that if they have to fight, this is not the worst place to do so. If they stand with their backs to the forbidden zone, it will be no different from fighting in a cave with their backs to the wall. Jinha agrees with them, saying that they have no other choice, and they prepare for battle. They take up their stances and aim their weapons at their enemies. At that moment, the group that have been pursuing them arrives, and their leader sarcastically asks them if they are done running. The two teams stand facing each other, while the demon slayers watch from behind. One of the disciples complains that Insor and Jinha are causing them a lot of trouble, and decides not to waste any more time, and orders the others to attack them immediately. The warriors rush forward from all sides. Insol and Jinha grip their swords tighter, and the battle begins. At this time, the chief instructor stands high on the cliff next to instructor Jingak. The chief instructor rubs his chin and watches as the students rush at Insol and Sojinha, tells instructor Jingak that this will probably be the final battle that will determine the 10 demon masters. The clash begins with someone throwing a multitude of hidden weapons at them. Insol dodges with ease, his body moving smoothly, but another student rushes at him, swinging his arm and ready to strike. The student's sword swings down sharply, but Insol shifts slightly to the side, calm and focused. With the same movement, he counterattacks, his strike fast and accurate. The blade reaches its target, his opponent gasps as blood pours out, and Insol becomes the first to shed blood. So Jinha also rushes forward in his own battle, defeating the student in front of him with quick precision. Another opponent lunges from behind, but his sword describes an arc behind him, clean and merciless, defeating several opponents in an instant. He exhales sharply, his breath trembling, almost exhausted, as he looks ahead trying to recover. But there is no time to rest. Another disciple jumps in with a crushing blow. Jinha blocks, but the blow shakes his arms and throws him back, sliding far across the ground under sheer force. Her slide only stops when her back collides with someone else's. It's Unsar, their backs pressed together, both breathing heavily, their chests rising and falling in rhythm. The remaining students form a circle around them, completely surrounding them. There are no gaps, no way out. Jinha stabilizes her stance and directs her sword outward. Yunsol parries it, raising her own blade, ready to continue. Still breathing heavily, Jinha glances at Gigi out of the corner of her eye. She asks, "Are they really going to die here?" Then he exhales a trembling laugh, a faint smile curving his lips. He has no regrets. He gave everything he had. Insol listens, his own breathing uneven. His words echo in his mind, no regrets. His eyes still burn with a stubborn will to live. A memory flashes in his mind. his grandfather's warm, gentle smile. Then it changes, warmth replaced by horror. His grandfather's broken body, left to rot in the open air. Something inside Insel twists violently. His expression hardens, and in a quiet, trembling voice, he mutters that he cannot die here. At that moment, his eyes light up, glowing red with rage and an unshakable determination to live. Two enemies rush down from above, their intent to kill almost palpable. Insel does not move. He waits. Then, preparing his sword for an arc strike, he twists his wrist back and grips the hilt tighter. His hand moves as if in a fog. Two flashes of sword energy cut through the air, clean and simultaneous. The attacking enemies freeze in midair. Blood spurted from their throats before they even hit the ground. Insel moves on. Before their bodies touch the ground, he moves again. His eyes are cold and empty, his movements sharp and lifeless, as if possessed. Insel pushes off with his foot and leaps forward. With one movement, his blade pierces 3 opponents at once. None of them even have time to react before they fall. The rest recoil in panic. What kind of sword technique is this? We must kill him first. Seeing how dangerous he has become, they rush at him together, drawing their blades. Insel does not move. He waits. He concentrates all his energy, his senses focused on a single point. Move as your instincts guide you. The words of the Wandering Beast Pavilion echo in his mind. The memory takes him back to his training with Sa Wu, the master of the pavilion, whose calm voice tells him that he has already mastered the sword technique of the Wandering Beast Pavilion. Insel's eyes suddenly become empty, consumed by a thirst for blood. The redness deepens, fierce and wild, like a beast let off its chain. Then, chaos. His sword dances in the air, each movement unreadable, impossible to follow. When the flurry ends, Insel stands alone. The bodies of those who rushed at him hang briefly in the air, then collapse, lifeless. The chief instructor and instructor Jin Hakak stand frozen, unable to speak, their eyes wide with disbelief. The bodies hit the ground hard, one after another. Insel's breathing evens out as his consciousness slowly returns. He looks at his sword, his thoughts racing. But before he can finish his thought, a deadly fist flies towards his face. His instincts kick in. Insel tilts his head and raises his sword, blocking just in time. The attacker grins, baring his teeth in excitement. Insel struggles to maintain his block, every muscle tense. The grin widens. "Gotcha," hisses the opponent. Chi flows into his fist, multiplying its power. Insel's sword vibrates violently, then cracks. In the next moment, it shatters into pieces. The blow throws him back across the plains. He falls heavily, bouncing once, twice, 3 times before coming to a stop, his body scraping across the ground. Jinha sees him fall. She abandons her fight, turning toward him, shouting his name. Her opponent smirks. Bo Yin-sol is almost dead. Ignoring him completely, Jinha screams again, her voice breaking. "Yin-sol, get up!" After all, the guy was flying straight into the restricted area. Yunsol's vision blurs, his head spins, the world falls silent. For a moment, he hears nothing. Then So's voice cuts through the fog, alarming, desperate. The forbidden zone. He looks down. The dark purple fog on the ground confirms it. He is beyond the border. He exhales, defeated, but slowly raises his head and meets a pair of monstrous, bloody eyes. In an instant, he moves. His claw cuts through the air as if through fog. Insol's focus sharpens. He watches as the claws descend, ready for death or disobedience. The chief instructor, seeing the impending carnage, opens his mouth wide, taking a huge, desperate breath for a mighty roar. With heart-wrenching force, he roars at the top of his lungs. Enough. The sound is a seismic wave of authority, powerful enough to shake the entire hellish island to its foundations. All heads turn sharply, drawn by the shockwave, to where he stands. Fortunately for Insel, the deafening roar and the shaking ground caused the killing demon to halt its attack, its claw freezing just inches from Insel's face. But when Insel looks up, his gaze catches the figure of Sa Wu, master of the Wandering Beast Pavilion, standing directly behind the demon, his sword pressed against the demon's throat with its cold blade. Insel stares in complete, stunned disbelief, whispering to himself, "Master Sa Wu." And Sa Wu responds with a look of radiant, deeply proud smile. In that single, sudden moment of overwhelming relief, brutal exhaustion finally overtakes Insel, and he instantly falls unconscious. The chief instructor, seeing Insel fall, scrambles down the cliffside, his voice strained with panic as he yells at the other officials to hurry. Fear creeps into his insistent voice as he yells at them to bring a doctor right now before this guy dies. Instructor Jingok follows him anxiously, worried not only for Yinsol, but also for the chief instructor, as he cautiously reminds him that if he stops the third test like this. But before the sentence can be finished, the chief instructor cuts him off with firm determination, stating that he will take full responsibility. This completely silences Instructor Jinhak, leaving him only to stare at the chief instructor in shock. The chief instructor, a secret thrill of triumph buzzing beneath his concern, thinks to himself, he has finally found him, the one with lightning-fast reflexes, a cold, murderous intent, and an indomitable spirit. A perfect diamond, second to none and lacking in no single trait. Looking at Insol as the healers rush to his aid, he states with conviction to himself, this boy is a true talent, a genius who will truly become one of the 10 demon masters. Sometime later, in a room on the island, someone abruptly calls out to the chief instructor, demanding an answer about what he was thinking. The man, aggressively tapping his finger on the table, irritably reminds him that the plan was for the 10 to join the 10 demonic sects, and 2 geniuses who would act as the eyes and ears for the 10 demon masters. Now, clearly upset, the man hisses at him that this was the plan, that there were supposed to be 12 of them. This man is Elder Hua Vimyon of the Demon Palace. Elder Hua continues his stern reprimand, telling him that he has ended the trial with 2 extra people, so he tells him straight up that he will be punished for it. The chief instructor, whose determination was unshakable, calmly tells Elder Hua that he was ready for this. This only causes Elder Hua to look at him with intense, probing attention. With a deep, exasperated sigh, the elder tells him that emissaries from the 10 demonic sects will soon be here, and that he does not know how they will take this news. But with unwavering confidence, the chief instructor tells Elder Hua that there is no way the eyes of the 10 demonic sects could be less sharp than his. A few hours later, same place but in a different building, Inso lies peacefully, fast asleep on his bed, oblivious to the turmoil raging around him. His eyes suddenly flutter and open, foggy and unfocused. But he instantly sits up, his gaze darting around nervously, wondering what this place is. Forcing himself to calm down and think, he notes that the room smells strongly of medicine, which means it must be a place where the wounded are treated. With this realization, he quickly examines his body and notices a striking difference. Touching the places where he had been wounded before, he realizes that his wounds have healed perfectly. And not just his external wounds. The internal wounds he had also healed. This leads him to believe that the healer from the Demon Palace is far more skilled than he could ever have imagined. After gathering his thoughts, he approaches the door and carefully opens it. Opening it, he finds himself in an empty, quiet corridor. Then, as he walks down the hallway, someone materializes behind him with a pleasant smile and calls him young master, telling him that since he has awakened, he should please follow this path. Insol nods and silently follows him as they both ascend the stairs in silence. Reaching the bottom, Insol's eyes widen in pure shock at the scene before him. The other students from Hell Island are sitting right here, all casually eating in this restaurant-like hall. Sitting down, he looks out the window and sees various buildings and structures. Still looking out the window, he asks the man who brought him down where they are, to which he replies that they are in the very center of Hell Island. Yunsol asks if this is really Hell Island, then concludes that it must be because it was a forbidden region when he was scouting the island. Therefore, he states that he now clearly sees why. Now that Insol has settled into his chair, the attendant asks him if he would like to order anything, respectfully telling him that if there is anything specific he wants, they can prepare it for him. Insol pauses, lost in thought, trying to decide. Then, looking out the window, he gestures with his finger, without turning his head, and tells the attendant that he would like 2 bowls of noodles, please. In just a few moments, his order of 2 steaming bowls of noodles arrives at his table. Insol remains motionless, staring at the bowls of noodles, deep in thought. His mind suddenly takes him back to the tender, peaceful times he spent with his grandfather, eating noodles together. Then he picks up his chopsticks and begins to eat, continuing to stare out the window. Then, without warning, Sujinha slumps down in the seat opposite him, asking him with playful defiance if he loves noodles so much that he ordered 2 bowls just for himself. Unsol, not in the mood to joke with him, uses his name directly and asks what's wrong, and she replies casually, "Well." He abruptly cuts her off and looks away, his expression thoughtful. Turning to him, he lets out a quiet sigh and sincerely thanks him for saving his life there. Insol stares blankly at him as he continues to speak, telling him that if it weren't for him, the guy would probably be dead by now. When he finishes, he asks him what he is talking about, then tells him that he just killed the enemy he saw in front of him. So Jinha is visibly shocked by his response, asking him what he is talking about and if he really doesn't know. She then calms down and explains to him that there were 12 members who were supposed to survive the third trial. But, pointing her finger at him, she informs him that the chief instructor suddenly intervened to save him. So now there are 14 of them. Therefore, looking away, with a blush of embarrassment on his cheeks, he informs him that he did indeed save him, adding that he just wanted to thank him for it. He also adds that he is not the type to go around saying such things, but pauses and clears his throat. But even after a detailed explanation, Yunso still looks back at him, completely confused. He catches his blank stare and realizes that he really didn't know. Shrugging it off, he tells him that it has been 4 days since he lost consciousness. Hearing this, he sinks into deep thought, lowering his head. Then, raising his head, his face serious, he tells her that he thought only 1 day had passed. This only makes So laugh as she tells him that he was lucky that the mad doctor happened to be nearby. Thinking of the mad doctor, he recalls that he was once known as the Divine Hand, the best doctor in the world. But after failing to cure his beloved's illness, his mind became clouded. Processing the memory, he recalls that the mad doctor is supposed to be able to save anyone as long as they are still breathing. This makes him wonder with deep pain what might have happened if his grandfather had been able to meet him before his death. So Jinha, now carelessly eating his second bowl of noodles, loudly slurping, tells him that he will tell him something else. Munching, he asks him to give him some as he is hungry from all this talking. And So just looks at him, silent, his thoughts fixed on the noodles he is devouring. She tells him that the assassins they fought were martial arts masters sent by the 10 demonic sects, and that according to their assessment, they will choose their successors. Hearing this, the news shocks Insol to the core. Then he regains his composure and says that he understands, and that it is not surprising that those guys' skills were equal to those of the instructors. He asks So Jinha if he knows why the chief instructor saved him, but the reason is also a mystery to him, as he tells her that this is what he wanted to ask her about. She tells him that it seems the chief instructor really wanted him to become one of the 10 demon masters, so he asks her if he could be from a clan that has something to do with it, and Unsor shakes her head, telling him that there is no connection between them. This makes things even less clear, as the chief instructor was severely punished for this, and it seems that he had to give up his position as chief instructor and return to the demon palace. This news shocks Insol. He also thinks, with deep confusion, that none of this makes any sense. That a person who has nothing to do with him would save him, even knowing that he would be punished? He cannot comprehend it. Suddenly, a huge bell rings out, making a massive, hollow sound. Insol turns sharply toward the noise, asking what it means. And so Jinha begins to get up from his seat, telling him that it must be time and that they must go. He looks at him and informs him that the sound is calling those who remain on Hell Island. In other words, he explains to him with a hint of seriousness, the leaders of the 10 demonic sects are here. Outside the building, located somewhere on Hell Island, the air crackles with tension. Inside, the disciples line up in rows of 2, 7 in each row. Yinsel, one of them, watches with complete calm and a dead expression on his face. Moments later, the door opens. Light from outside floods in as people whose presence radiates power enter. Yinsel's face suddenly shows extreme shock. He sees them enter, but the whole room is silent. He notices that so many people are moving, but not a single step can be heard. He quickly regains his composure and remains in line as they pass inside. Upon entering, one of the men with a spear looks at the students with curious eyes. Then the man points toward Insol and shouts, "That's the man!" This man is Yablachko, the deputy master of the necromancer sect, known as Bezla. He asks the student if he will become a demon master of the necromancer sect. Yinsel, thinking that he is being addressed, stares blankly at Yablachko. After a moment of confusion, the disciple standing behind Yinsel stammers and asks if Yablachko is addressing him. Yablachko instantly replies that it is. Calling the boy by name, Munhyo, he orders him to step forward and asks again if he will become a master demon of the necromancer sect. The boy steps forward and mumbles that he is only trained in swordplay and has never used a spear. Yablochko responds by spreading his arms and saying that it doesn't matter. He tells the boy that he was born with a physique made for the necromantic spear. Now that the boy is standing before him, Apple pokes him in the chest and tells him that since he has the body and talent suitable for the spear, but instead trained in swordplay, he was unable to achieve great success, even with such a physique. Young Moonho stands stunned and silent. Immediately after that, Apple turns to leave, telling him that if he understands, he should follow him. Young Moonho hurriedly follows him, shouting, "Yes!" Another member of the group laughs and announces that it is now his turn. With a cheerful expression on his face, he introduces himself as Jikyohan, the deputy master of the Hellblood Castle, also known as the Honorable 10,000 Poisons, the Red Wild Soul. Despite his light tone, all the disciples look on in fear, their eyes downcast, remembering that he is a master of the poison arts, who can kill all living things within a radius of 30 steps with a single wave of his hand. Jikohan slowly raises his hand, points, and names one of them. Sojinhan. He opens his palm toward him and asks if he will become the demon master of the Hellish Blood Castle, but he stands motionless, his eyes full of thoughts. He remembers that since childhood he has been called a sword genius. Being asked to join Hell's Blood Castle, a place that creates poison masters, seems unreal. Jikohan, still smiling calmly, notices the expression on her face and says, "The most terrifying poison in the world is a poisonous heart." He continues, "Even before the third trial began, he used a girl from the castle's marshal's office to kill all the students, and after she failed, he killed her to silence her." With a crooked smile, he finishes his statement and stares intently at him. So Jinnah quickly defends himself, shouting that the girl made the first move, and she was the first to try to kill him. To say that he killed her to silence her is an exaggeration, but Jikyohan interrupts him with a sigh. He doesn't blame him. He explains that the fact that he can kill many people without hesitation for his own purposes shows that he is suited to the poisonous arts of his castle. He adds that he cannot succeed in murim with this ability. Only the chosen few can command murim with a sword or blade. Then, with a welcoming gesture, he says that he has greater abilities with poison than with fencing. So Jinha stands quietly, thinking, his gaze sliding toward Inso. His eyes linger on him, and his mind is filled with echoes of the words about the Chosen One, as he recalls hearing that he first learned to wield a sword during the 10 Demon Masters trial, and that in such a short time his fighting power had become comparable to what he had achieved after 10 years of effort. Clenching his fist in realization, he concludes. He bows and says he will go to the castle of hellish blood. Jikyohan smiles faintly and tells him to follow him. As they leave, Yunto watches with serious concentration. Another member of the group steps forward with an authoritative tone, announcing that it is his turn. He approaches, radiating grandeur, and stands before the disciples with a stern gaze. This is Huaihakhan of the Fire Rain Sword Sect, currently the strongest swordsman on the demon path, known as the Sword Demon. The room falls silent as his gaze sweeps over them. The disciples bow their heads, praying inwardly to be chosen, hoping to receive recognition from the greatest swordsman on the demon path. Finally, he says, "You." His gaze rests on Poinsor. He tells Insol that not only Master Pavilion Jin, but also other elders have praised him highly, and that he has heard that Insol has also studied Master Pavilion's philosophy. Insol replies, "Yes." Huaihakhan turns to leave, telling Yinsol that he is excited to see his growth, and that he should continue to train diligently. But Yinsol does not move. He looks at the remaining men, his gaze fixed on one of them. Then, gathering his courage, he looks at Huaihakhan again and stammers. He pauses, swallows hard, and starts again. He will not go to the Fire Rain Sword Sect. The whole room falls silent. Huaihakhan slowly turns around, his eyes filled with murderous intent. He repeats once more, very loudly, "How dare the boy reject the offer of the main school?" His murderous aura fills the air, bringing Insol to her knees. The pressure makes it hard to breathe. Nevertheless, Insol pushes his voice through the suffocating weight, saying that, as far as he knows, he is allowed to reject offers. Huaihakhan, now a little calmer, eases the pressure and asks where Insol wants to go after rejecting his sect. Yunsol, still sweating and gasping for air, sighs with relief that he can breathe again. Then he boldly says that he wants to go to the Wandering Beast Pavilion. Huaihakhan's face hardens. "The Wandering Beast Pavilion?" he repeats. His rage explodes. His intention to kill grows again, filling the room. Of all places, the decaying Wandering Beast Pavilion. Is he trying to show contempt for his sect? The pressure becomes unbearable. Even the other representatives stagger. Insol grits his teeth, barely managing to endure it. Huaihakhan steps forward, towering over Insol, whose lungs struggle under the suffocating force. It was the true power of the greatest demonic sword before him. But before anything worse can happen, one of the representatives stands in front of him. Everyone looks on in shock. The disciples cannot believe it. The man standing in front of Insul is from the Wandering Beast Pavilion. Hoi-hyuk's voice trembles with anger as he asks how a mere master of a secret pavilion dares to block his path. His intention to kill intensifies again. The man staggers, but stands firm, gripping the hilt of his sword tightly. The disciples think he is mad, bearing his sword before the sword demon. Insul, still on the ground, looks at Elder Saw in shock. Hoi-hyuk, boiling with rage, tells the man that he is crossing the line because he is close to the pavilion master, Jin. Elder Saw does not respond. His sword remains half drawn, his stance unshaken. Another representative, pale with fear, thinks that if the sword demon loses his temper, he may drag the other candidates into it as well. He needs to dissuade him somehow. But before he can do anything, Hoi-hyuk's sword begins to emerge from its sheath on its own, driven by his aura. There is a sharp, metallic clang. The blade is forcefully returned to its sheath, stopped by a stranger's hand. The man who stopped it lets out a quiet sigh. His expression is half playful, with a sarcastic smile, and he tells everyone to look at themselves, how alarmed they are. Then, in an authoritative tone that fills the room, he says, "Enough." The hall, filled with tension, falls silent for a moment. The man who stopped the chaos still holds Hoi-hyuk's sword from being sheathed. Hoi-hyuk looks at this man with the fierce irritation he still feels towards Sa-woo. The man releases his sword, and Hoi-hyuk now calls him by name. With a smile, Danshin raises his palm in a sign of retreat, telling Hoi-hyuk to please let this go for his sake. This man is the deputy master of the Wandering Beast Pavilion, Danshin. The other representatives standing behind Hoi-hyuk, now slightly relaxed, see this as an opportunity to intervene. The pavilion must have a disciple anyway. Hoi-hyuk, still seething with anger, pauses, quietly considering this with cold eyes. Sa-woo, having sheathed his sword again, still stands guard while Yun-sol behind him tries to get up, catching his breath. With annoyance, Hoi-hyuk turns his head with a resigned sigh, now turning completely and walking away. He tells Danshin that if he is taking the boy away, he should do so quickly, before his sword slips out on its own. Danshin, with his playful manner, claps his hands, thanking him for his understanding. Danshin, with his narrow eyes, now turns to Insul with a smile, while Insul wipes the sweat from his face, breathing a sigh of relief. As the tension eases, Sa-woo remains calm and pats Insul on the back, while Danshin tells them both that it's time for them to go too. When Insul exits, he looks at the back of Hoi-hyuk, who is already almost out the door, and realizes that the aura emanating from Hyuk earlier was filled with a strong, murderous intent directed at him. Now, looking at the backs of Sa-woo and Danshin, he thinks that if they hadn't intervened and stopped it, he finishes this thought with a heavy swallow. He doesn't even want to imagine what would have happened, so he quickly hurries to catch up with Sa-woo and Danshin, walking behind them. Outside the hall, as they walk, Sa-woo tells Insul that his skills have improved incredibly since he last saw him, and Insul replies that it's all thanks to him for teaching him the arts of the Wandering Beast. Sa-woo then playfully pats him on the head, telling him that he didn't expect him to choose the Wandering Beast Pavilion, and calls him promising. Insul, also in a playful mood, replies that he felt that the direction the Wandering Beast Pavilion was taking suited him well. Danshin, walking ahead of them, turns around with his calm smile and says that they have arrived. When the three of them stop a few meters from the entrance, Danshin tells Insul that this is the Wandering Beast Pavilion. Insul looks completely confused, his mouth and eyes wide open, because he was expecting a quiet, serious atmosphere. But instead, he sees a crowd of people bustling about, the place as lively as a market where buying and selling takes place. Danshin sees the expression on Insul's face and asks him if he is surprised. He then tells Insul that unlike other sects that dominate the nearby markets, their pavilion insists on self-sufficiency. Insul then responds by turning to look at the people in this place. He sees that most of the people here are elderly, so he asks if there are any wandering beasts of his age in the pavilion. Then, with some nervousness, Danshin says that there were young disciples who came, after hearing about the legend of the Wandering Beast Pavilion, but most of them either died or ran away during training. Insul, now astonished, says, "I see." Meanwhile, Danshin looks far ahead and, seeing what he is looking for, says that the place will do. They head to a place that looks very shabby. Then Danshin tells Insul that from now on, this will be his quarters. Danshin points to another place and tells Insul that if anything needs to be repaired, he should talk to the blacksmith over there, who can provide him with the necessary tools. Insul turns around and sees the blacksmith, whose name is Wang Jia. After that, Danshin tells Sa-woo that they need to go. Sa-woo then approaches Insul and tells him that he is taking his leave, but also tells Insol to continue his training. Insol, looking innocent, calls him master and asks if he is not staying here. But Danshin answers this question with a smile, telling Insol that Sawu is the head of the secret transmission hall. He explains that even if it is for his protection, Sawu has neither the authority nor the power to recklessly challenge the sword demon, and informs him that everyone must pay for what they have done. Insol looks at both men with confusion in his eyes and asks what they mean by paying for it. He then asks if they are leaving now because of this. Sawu looks encouragingly at Insol, telling him not to worry and that it is only a minor punishment. Insol still looks gloomy, so Sawu unexpectedly, playfully slaps Insol on the back, telling him not to even think about slacking off just because he's not here, and says he'll check in often to see how he's doing. Even after the slap, Insol remains motionless, looking sadly at Sawu and deep in thought. As he leaves, Insol tells Sawu to please take care of himself. Danshin, who is still there, calls out to Bo Insol and tells him that he is not yet officially a disciple of the Wandering Beast Pavilion. This leaves Insol completely confused, and he asks, "What?" Danshin now leans very close to Insol. In this position, he tells him that he has become the successor to the Heart Demon, but that does not mean that he is officially a disciple of the Wandering Beast Pavilion. Danshin finally opens his narrow eyes. His smile disappears, and he tells Insol that the weak cannot become disciples of the Wandering Beast Pavilion. Insol's eyes widen, and various thoughts swarm in his head. With seriousness in his voice, he shouts out, asking Danshin if that means that if he becomes strong enough, he can become a disciple of the Wandering Beast Pavilion without any other procedures. Danshin returns to his usual smiling manner and replies that everything is exactly as he said. He tells Insol that there is no use for formalities or empty rituals in this pavilion. He then explains to Insol that every disciple here represents the Wandering Beast Pavilion itself, so there is no need to force oaths or allegiances. He tells Insol that, without worrying about anything else, he should train in martial arts and become stronger. Then Danshin strikes his chest with his clenched fist and tells Insol that he needs to become strong enough to be recognized as a true disciple of the Wandering Beast Pavilion. Finally, he tells Insol something that shocks him. Everyone here is his teacher. But he adds, getting excited about what he is about to say, that whether they want to teach him or not is up to them. The next day, at Iron Staff Peak, a tall, rugged mountain mostly covered in fog, somewhere nearby, Insol stops to catch his breath, breathing heavily and sweating. Stopping, he places his palm on a ledge and looks ahead, sweat dripping from his chin. Then, without wasting any time, he continues his ascent, still holding his palm on the mountain. As he climbs, he thinks that he is almost at the top. Then he remembers Danshin's words. Tomorrow, climb Iron Staff Peak. A memory flashes through his mind. Danshin tells him that there is a master there who will teach him the best technique for internal cultivation. Now, finally, the summit is within reach. His head appears, and he has finally reached the summit. But before Yinsel has time to climb to the surface, he hears a voice saying, "So, this is the one chosen as the successor to the Heart Demon of the Wandering Beast Pavilion." On the surface stands a man in monastic robes, his back to Yinsel, his hands clasped behind his back. Yinsel quickly climbs to the surface, bowing his head, fist to palm, greeting the man, saying, "That's right, and by order of Deputy Master Dan." Before he can finish his name, the man interrupts him, saying that Yinsel must be here to learn the method of internal cultivation. The man tells Yinsel that he has already cultivated internal energy, but is seeking a higher level. But Yinsel, who has never cultivated before, stares blankly, unable to utter a word. The man turns slightly to look at him and tells him that he can feel qi flowing from his body, and that it is not the qi of a beginner. It is something that has been systematically accumulated since a young age. Yinsel, still not understanding anything, replies that he has lived his entire life as an undertaker and has never practiced any internal cultivation techniques. The man smiles faintly, saying that it must be one of two things. In an instant, he closes the distance between himself and Yinsel, bringing his face closer with a frightening aura, telling him that he is either the greatest liar under the heavens or has mastered the arts of internal cultivation in his sleep. Yinsel, slightly frightened but composed, tells the man that he swears it is not a lie and says that he can confirm it himself. The man looks annoyed, staring at Yinsel without saying a word, just thinking. Then, out of irritation, he grabs Yinsel by the wrist, lifting his hand, and asks if that is the case, then he can destroy all the qi in his body, right? Yinsel confidently and firmly replies, "Of course." This is not what the man expects. They just stand there, while a light breeze blows silently between them. Then something catches the man's attention as he looks at Insol. He observes closely and notices that the child's body is filled with qi, but there is no circulation. This means that he has been blindly accumulating qi in his dantian without any flow or control. Something impossible under normal circumstances. He suddenly pulls Insol closer by the wrist, and Insol cries out from the sudden jerk. Now that Insol is close enough, the man looks down at him and asks who he is. Screaming in despair, he asks Insol who taught him to accumulate qi, but Insol only becomes more anxious, looking back without understanding, unable to answer. Confused, Insol looks up at him, not understanding what he is talking about. Letting him go, the man studies him for a moment, before asking if anyone in the past taught him how to calm his mind or breathe properly. Insol thinks for a moment and replies that his grandfather once taught him a breathing technique. He tells Insol to show him. Closing his eyes, Insol evens out his breathing. Gigi exhales gently to clear his mind, then opens his mouth, drawing in air slowly and steadily. He switches to breathing in through his nose and out through his mouth, and as the rhythm settles in, energy begins to gather faintly in his core. The monk watches, stunned, unable to believe his eyes. Insol circulates qi while standing, something that should be impossible for an untrained person. This would mean that he is able to control energy in any position. He doesn't have time to finish his thought and yells at him to stop. Crossing his arms over his chest, the man stares at him intently and asks if his grandfather really taught him this. Insol nods without hesitation. He continues, saying that when he played dead with his grandfather, the old man taught him this breathing method, saying it was the best way to breathe inside a coffin. The man pauses, then places his hand on his own dantian and says that this is not just a simple breathing exercise. It is a method of gathering true qi in the dantian. He turns to Insol and tells him that his dantian already contains the internal energy accumulated over 10 years. Insol stands rooted to the spot, his gaze falling incredulously to his stomach. After a long pause, the man asks what his grandfather's name is. Nervously, Insol replies that his grandfather's name is Bujanyan. The man quietly repeats the name, thinking. An image of a formidable fencer flashes in his mind. There is only one person in all of Mirama with that name, a man once known as the strongest swordsman of the demonic path and former vice master of the demon palace, Bujanyan. Insol lowers his head, stunned by the image of his warm, kind grandfather flickering in his memory. It is impossible to compare this man with the vice master of the demon palace. He shakes his head, trying to dispel the thought. It cannot be that such a man ended up becoming an undertaker. The man in front of him watches silently, thinking. After a moment, he says that this breathing technique is a Shaolin method. These words hurt. Insol trembles. If it's Shaolin, then it's from the orthodox Miram, which means his grandfather must have been an orthodox martial arts master. If this truth comes out, the demon palace will turn against him. He imagines losing his rank among the 10 demonic masters, or worse. The man studies him with an unreadable expression on his face. Then the man suddenly smiles and tells him that he has no doubts about him. Given the demon palace's intelligence, he is sure that they have already checked everything thoroughly, and he is confident that they have not found this breathing method. He points to Insol and says he will teach him because he made a promise to the Wandering Beast Pavilion. He makes it clear that he doesn't care whether the method is orthodox or demonic. Turning away, he issues a cold warning. If Insol ever teaches anyone, even a single character of this technique, he will personally kill him and everyone associated with him. Insol swallows hard, bows with his fist to his palm, in complete silence. The man pauses, looks back, squinting his eyes, and continues walking. Before leaving, he takes one last look and says that his name is Hyur Jimgun. Hearing the man's name, Insol sinks into deep thought. He cannot understand why the monastic name Dharma contains the character Hyur, which means blood. Hyur Jimgun stops in front of the building without turning around and asks Insol if he knows the difference between orthodox and demonic techniques of cultivating internal energy. Insol simply replies that he does not know. Hyul Jimgun begins to explain. The cultivation methods of orthodox Miram are natural ways of creating internal energy in the human body. The demonic path, on the other hand, uses any means necessary to create enormous energy from the very beginning. However, such methods go against the nature of the human body. Over time, orthodox martial arts masters obtain much purer and stronger true qi. He then tells Insol that the technique he will teach him lies beyond the realm of demonic martial arts. It is the most excellent and wonderful cultivation technique of all. But perfection always comes at a price. Raising his right hand, he shows Insol that he is missing all his fingers. At this sight, Insol's eyes widen in fear. Hyo Jumgan tells him that the process of learning the technique was so painful that he ate his own fingers to endure the pain. Looking at his mutilated palm, he says that only those who are able to endure such suffering can truly attain a body that is in perfect harmony with their inner energy. Gazing at the sky, he continues. He was once a martial arts master at the Azure Dragon Temple in Yunnan, but he was framed for murder and expelled, his internal energy sealed away. In an attempt to restore it, he received help from the Wandering Beast Pavilion. To repay this debt, he promised them his internal energy cultivation technique. And now, he says, if Yinsol cannot learn it, then he himself has failed to fulfill his promise. That is why he must test Yinsol first. His expression becomes serious. He explains that he is using his true qi to pierce all 365 of Insol's acupuncture points at once, because every vessel must be clear in order to learn this technique. Yinsol begins to look concerned. Hyeoljumgun continues, saying that usually this process is done gradually, with care and time, but doing everything at once will be excruciatingly painful. He warns Insol to give up if he is not sure he can endure it. Yinsol swallows and strengthens his resolve, saying he will do it. Hyeoljumgun smiles faintly, almost in anticipation. Without wasting a second, he raises both hands, filling them with glowing true qi, and shouts at Insol not to regret it. With a quick movement, he presses his palms against Insol's stomach, where his dantian is located. A massive wave of pressure breaks through the air, and light envelops Insol's body. The energy spreads outward, shaking everything around it. But Hyeoljumgun's expression suddenly changes. This is not what he expected. Using true qi to pierce each acupuncture point should feel like bones being scraped with a blade. However, Insol stands there, silent and calm. Hyeoljumgun hesitates, but allows the process to continue, watching to see how long the boy can endure. Then something even stranger happens. No impurities come out of Insol's body. There is no foul odor that should accompany the cleansing process. He slowly removes his hands, and the light fades. Insol remains motionless, breathing evenly. A surprised grin spreads across Hyeoljumgun's face when he realizes what he is seeing. Could it be that this boy had no dirty energy in his vessels from the very beginning? Insol's breathing becomes more and more even, and he regains consciousness. He opens his eyes and finds Hyeoljumgun laughing, a laugh that grows louder and crazier with every passing second. Then, Hyeoljumgun suddenly stops and asks if his name is really Bu Insol. Nervously, Insol nods and answers yes. Radiating his qi with wild excitement, Hyeoljumgun smirks and announces that he will teach Insol his technique for cultivating internal energy. 6 months later, atop a fog-shrouded cliff, a tall young man stands silently at the edge, peering into the haze. Behind him, Hyeoljumgun crouches down to lift a huge boulder with one hand. He grins a crooked, impatient grin and hurls it with frenzied force. The boulder flies toward the young man. He doesn't move an inch. It hits his bare back, and instead of knocking him down, the stone shatters into pieces, the fragments scattering around him. A faint steam rises from his skin. Hyeoljumgun picks up another boulder, juggling it in one hand with a satisfied smile. He declares that the young man has truly mastered this. Calling him by name, he reveals that the figure standing before him is none other than Bu Insol. Master Hyeoljumgun watches him with quiet pride, thinking that it took Bu Insol only 6 months to master what took him 3 whole years. He mentally acknowledges that Insol has far exceeded his expectations. His gaze fixes on Insol's dantian, noting with satisfaction that Insol has learned to disperse the true qi gathered within him after mastering the circulation technique. He acknowledges that Insol has unlocked his hidden potential, becoming healthier and stronger in such a short time. When Yinsol turns to him, Hyeoljumgun says it's time to begin, and Yinsol simply nods. He sits in the lotus position, calming his breathing until his heart slows to a steady rhythm. Completely focused, he reflects on how he was able to quickly reach the first level thanks to Hyo's guidance, but that it is not enough. There are 8 levels in the circulation technique, and he must reach at least the 2nd level before leaving this place. Hyeoljumgun stands silently with his arms crossed, watching approvingly as Yinsol begins to circulate his energy. But soon, something unusual awakens. Dark energy oozes from Yunsol's body, slowly enveloping him like a ghostly mist. Hyo's proud expression turns to confusion as he studies the texture of the energy. In the next moment, his eyes widen with alarm. The black energy pulsates with frightening intensity, pressing down on the air. A realization dawns on him. This is the second level, the realm of unblemished bones and muscles. He immediately understands that once a cultivator enters this stage, their bones and muscles reach peak efficiency. But such a sudden transformation places a tremendous strain on the body. This thought alone conjures up an image of rapidly expanding muscles bursting with their own strength. Almost instantly, Insol's lips part, and blood gushes from his mouth. He clenches his teeth, enduring the burning agony spreading through him, his body trembling under the unbearable pressure. His skin burns with heat, his temperature rising rapidly. Hyojumgan rushes to his back and places his hand between Insol's shoulder blades, his voice cutting through the chaos, commanding him to cast aside all extraneous thoughts and focus. The moment his palm touches the body, Insol's body can no longer contain the true chi flowing through him. In this situation, he will suffer irreversible internal damage. Knowing there is no other way, Hyol evens his breathing and prepares to burn his own true chi, the primal essence, the life force with which he was born. He channels it through his hand into Insol's core, sacrificing his own life force to stabilize the furious energy inside the boy. Moments pass before Insol's breathing evens out again. The heat dissipates. Calm returns. Then, suddenly, Insol opens his eyes with a sharp gasp, like a man awakening from a nightmare. His hands rise instinctively, his eyes wide with disbelief as he feels a new surge of power flowing freely through his veins. Realization dawns. This energy can only be one thing. He turns abruptly, panic rising, and finds Hyojumgan on the ground, coughing weakly. Frightened, he breaks his meditation pose and rushes to him, asking if Hyol has given him his true chi, and why he has done something so reckless. Hyol just smiles through his ragged breathing, waving away Insol's concern with a tired wave of his hand. He tells him not to worry about it, because the monk would never have been able to leave the Wandering Beast Pavilion without truly teaching Insol. Insol looks at him, overwhelmed with emotion, and thinks that despite his harsh behavior, Master Hyojumgan is deeply caring at heart. When the old master finally comes to his senses and gets to his feet, Insol tries to express his gratitude, vowing never to forget what has been done for him. Hyol interrupts him, saying no, instead he must forget. Turning his back on Insol, Hyol warns him to completely erase his existence from his memory. These words echo painfully in Insol's mind, connecting with the old voice of his first teacher, who long ago told him that whether it be hatred or kindness, it is better to forget if you can. This echo leaves him in silence, lost in thought, wondering why everyone tells him the same thing. Hyol's voice breaks through his thoughts. If Insol really wants to repay him, he says, he must reach the 8th level, the realm of the Great Source. Energy emanates weakly from his body as he looks up at the sky, admitting that the 5th level was the limit he himself had reached. That is how, he declares, Yunsol can repay him. Yunsol listens in silence, his expression frozen in determination. He replies that he understands. He will do as he asks. Still standing with his back to him, Hyojumgan tells him that now that he has reached the 2nd level, he no longer needs his guidance. What he needs is not a deeper mastery of circulation techniques, but to complete the basics of martial arts. He points to the western cliff of the Wandering Beast Pavilion and tells Insol to climb up there and train. This instruction feels like a quiet farewell. Insol stands motionless for a long time, looking at his master's back, before bowing deeply, pressing his fist to his palm, and sincerely thanking him. Master Hyol does not turn around or respond. Only when Insol's presence fades into the distance does Hyora speak again, his words carried away by the mountain wind as he quietly wishes him the same. 3 months later, on a quiet night in a tavern inside the Wandering Beast Pavilion, a group of men sit at a table, drinking and chatting. One of them raises a cup filled with alcohol and tells the man opposite him that he heard that the Divine Foundation Squad returned this morning. He says he thinks they were on a mission to destroy the Azure Dragon Pavilion. Another man bursts out laughing, saying that makes sense. After all, the Azure Dragon Pavilion harmed one of their disciples. He asks who else but the Divine Foundation Squad would take on such a mission. The first man laughs too, agreeing that hearing such news is like a breath of fresh air. Changing the subject, he asks if it's time for the Wind and Cloud Squad to return. Outside, there is a faint sound of footsteps on the tiled roofs. Swords flash, shadows dart across the upper floors behind them. The man sitting opposite notices the movement and smirks, saying it's better not to speak too soon. The other turns, half drunk, and also looks out the window. With a drunken smile, he mutters that he doesn't understand why they don't just come in through the front door like normal people. More and more figures continue to land on the roofs, one after another, moving quickly in the moonlight. Then, when the stream of arrivals passes, one figure stops at the edge of the roof. A mocking voice comes from behind him, saying that he is standing there as if posing for a portrait. The voice continues, asking why he doesn't go straight to the Azure Wind Pavilion instead of striking dramatic poses on the rooftop. The man turns slightly at the sound of his name, Baekhyun. He is the leader of the Wind and Cloud Squad of the Wandering Beast Pavilion. Removing his mask, he addresses the speaker as the pavilion's vice master. Danchon, the pavilion's vice master, tells Baekhyun with a playful smile that he has asked many times to be called by his first name when they are alone. But Baekhyun frowns at this suggestion, calling it nonsense and saying that the pavilion's rules are already relaxed enough. Sighing quietly, he changes his tone and says that the timing is perfect. He was going to see Danchon anyway. Danchon blinks in confusion, asking what he means. Baekhyun's expression hardens. He tells Danchon that he has heard rumors that he accepted someone with enormous potential as one of the 10 demon masters, even though he was against the decision from the start. He asks why Danchon accepted the boy when he was supposed to go to the Fire Rain Sword Sect. Danchon, lazily rubbing his chin with his hand, replies that it was actually the boy's own choice. He explains that the boy himself rejected the Fire Rain Sword Sect's offer. Baekhyun looks skeptical and repeats the question. Did the boy really choose the Wandering Beast Pavilion? Danchon nods, admitting that he almost had to fight that crazy old sword demon over it. Then he smiles again, asking if Baekhyun isn't proud that the boy chose their pavilion. Baekhyun looks away, slightly annoyed. He reminds Danchon that because of this decision, the Fire Rain Sword Sect did not choose any of the 10 demon masters this year, and that the sect leader himself has expressed his disappointment. Danchon's eyes narrow slightly, his tone softening as he speaks clearly. His calmness, however, only adds fuel to Baekhyun's disappointment. He takes a step forward, raising his voice, and shouts that Danchon knows very well that the Demon Palace is already suspicious of them, and the Wandering Beast Pavilion has already suffered because of it. Danchon remains unperturbed, the same playful smile lingering on his face as he tells Baekhyun that he has spent too long in the Jianghu. He reminds him that the goal of the Wandering Beast Pavilion is to perfect martial arts, not to chase political power. Baekhyun smirks, calling it an ideal, not reality. Then he exhales slowly, forcing himself to regain his composure, and says that despite everything, there is something he must do. Opening his eyes again, still boiling with irritation, he asks where the boy is. He tells Danchon that the boy's position as one of the 10 demon masters is now at stake. At this moment, Fallen Leaf floats calmly on the surface of the water. Then a foot descends on it with a precise, practiced movement, pressing down just enough to move forward without disturbing the surface. Insul glides across the water, his body moving in a rhythm known only to him. A memory surfaces in Insul's mind. Go-ul, once a great thief nicknamed the Swift Ghost, teaching him the art of agility. The old man boasted that this technique broke the boundary between movement and footwork. He named it Fast Ghost in honor of himself, and warned that students who couldn't keep up often ended up crippled. Still, he was curious to see how Insul would fare. A month later, Insul's movements became smooth and perfect. Go-ul watched, his eyes nearly popping out of their sockets in disbelief. Unable to believe that Insul had reached the 3rd level of mastery in just 1 month, in anticipation of his retirement, he points to Insul and declares that finally, someone can inherit his movement technique. Throwing the collected bags over his shoulder, he announces that he is handing over the training hall to the young man. Insul has learned the basics. Now it's up to him. He must hone his technique in real-world application. Insul rushes forward, gliding across the water again, each step precise and confident. From the cliff above, Danshin and Baekhyun watch silently, assessing his performance. Danshin squints, leaning closer as recognition dawns on him. This is Master Go's Swift Ghost, a movement technique that cannot be mastered quickly. Baekhyun confirms this, his voice quiet, filled with respect and awe. This knowledge ignites a rage within him. Could it be that since arriving at the Wandering Beast Pavilion, Insul has focused solely on movement techniques? Danshin's light, playful smile dispels this thought. Insul joined them only 6 months ago, and it was only last month that he learned the cultivation technique from Elder Jungang at Iron Peak. Baekhyun turns to Danshin, stunned, struggling to voice the rumor that Yunsol mastered the way of the wild beast on Hell Island in just 2 weeks. Danshin interrupts him before he can finish, confirming with a crooked smile that the rumors are true. He adds that Sogu provided Insol with all the extreme spring spiritual water at his disposal, which probably contributed to the early development of the transcendent nerve plexus. Baekhyun watches closely, noting that even this assistance alone cannot explain his mastery of the way of the wild beast. 12 masters from the 10 demon masters were expected, but with Insol's arrival, there are now 14, which is a shock in itself. He asks if the pavilion master will soon emerge from seclusion. Danshin responds calmly. This delay is the reason for all the work he is doing. Baekhyun's expression becomes tense and serious, noting that the 10 demon masters' plan originated from the demon palace, and now they are all at odds with each other. Danshin, unperturbed, remarks that unlike the Wandering Beast Pavilion, which values the survival of the fittest, other sects have specially selected successors. No wonder they are shocked when told to teach the 10 demon masters their martial arts. Thoughtfully rubbing his chin, Danshin asks if Baekhyun understands the true purpose of the plan: to train martial arts masters capable of challenging the renowned masters. Baekhyun, knowing the goal, is surprised that Danshin knows it too. Danshin notes that some sects remain in the dark, sending selected students to compete, without understanding the broader implications. Danshin remarks that this strategy is not without merit. If the students possess true talent, they deserve such an opportunity. Baekhyun agrees in principle, but his gaze wanders. It was because of this child that Kang Mi-ryun, the only son of the leader of the White Demon Temple, died. Eun-sol continues to train, paying no attention to their discussion. Danshin reflects that the 10 demon sects have agreed to the third trial. It is unfortunate that Kang Mi-ryun died, but what can the Wandering Beast Pavilion do? He wonders if only the White Demon Temple holds a grudge against Insor. Baekhyun explains that the Fire Rain Sword Sect is furious because someone who is not one of their disciples has mastered advanced sword techniques. The sword demon, Wee Hee-kun, demands disciplinary action, and Cheon-yang, the instructor who taught Insu, has been suspended and locked up. Danshin presses his hands to his head, sighing deeply and longingly, not believing that the teacher's punishment is not enough for them. Now they want to punish the student. He calls the sects petty and asks Baekhyun what they are really trying to achieve. Baekhyun replies that they want to test whether Yunsol is worthy of becoming one of the 10 demon masters and make sure that he never picks up that sword again. Danshin looks away, shaking his head. Such demands are absurd. Yunsol is already a demon master and a disciple of the Wandering Beast Pavilion. Silence reigns. Danshin's gaze slides down to Yunsol. The boy pauses, looking up at the man. Then, with a sudden leap, he jumps, landing on top of the cliff next to them. He bows respectfully to Danshin, greeting him as Vice Master. Danshin's expression softens with restrained pride. Insul has mastered the techniques of movement with outstanding skill. Baekhyun's voice sounds sharp, demanding an answer as to whether this is indeed the Demon Pavilion Master. Danshin intervenes, introducing Baekhyun as the leader of the Wind and Cloud Squad, allowing Yinsol to call him Squad Leader Baek. Yinsol bows again, fist to palm, offering his greeting. Baekhyun nods briefly in response. Baekhyun leans forward to speak, but Danshin interrupts him, waving his hand right in front of his face and saying there is no need to explain. Yunsol watches silently, thinking, and then finally says that whatever happens, he will take responsibility. Baekhyun crosses his arms over his chest, realizing that Eun-sol has heard everything. Danshin frowns. Eun-sol explains that he used the eye of the mind, of the vibration of the chi of the way of the wandering beast, following the vibrations of the water while performing movement techniques. Baekhyun, stunned, asks if he really amplified his senses to the limit through the vibrations of chi while moving. Yunsol confirms that every step was in perfect synchronization with the water beneath him. Danshin leans closer, teasingly remarking that Eun-sol is always like this, and asking if it's shocking. Baekhyun clenches the dust tightly in his fist, the sound of sand being crushed audible in disbelief. He mutters that such genius really exists. His expression suddenly changes to a bright, excited smile, and he asks Danshin why his belief in Insol is not absolute. He wonders aloud whether they should send Insol to the Demon Palace for testing, fearing that the child might be killed. Baekhyun insists that the palace's goal is only to appease the ego of the leader of the White Demon Temple, not to harm it. If they reject the palace, complications will arise, he warns. Danshin protests that Eun-sol is too young. Before the discussion continues, Eun-sol declares that he will go. He repeats himself, his voice firm and decisive. He will meet with the Demon Palace, face to face. He argues that the palace only wants to protect its image, and killing a child will tarnish it. Moreover, as a disciple of the Wandering Beast Pavilion, he cannot shy away from challenges. Danchin slaps his forehead, overcome with humility. Baekhyun nods, acknowledging that the boy is right. This confrontation was inevitable, and it is better to let him act than to worry about it later. Danshin raises his head, giving permission to take the test if the palace promises to turn a blind eye to previous events. Eun-so bows, fist to palm, confirming her understanding. Later, at the gates of the Demon Palace, Eun-so stops, remembering the first time he arrived here, knowing nothing of martial arts. Now he walks with purpose as the Demon Master of the Wandering Beast Pavilion, the all-encompassing pavilion, the brain of the Demon Palace. The guard gestures toward the doors, indicating that someone will escort him once he is inside. Eun-so reads the sign, the all-encompassing pavilion, the headquarters of administration and strategy, equivalent to the pavilion of the chief strategist in the Murim Alliance. He takes a step forward, pushing the door open. Light floods his face. His eyes wide, he whispers in awe, "This is it. Inside the all-encompassing pavilion." A man sits at a low table, and the servant stands beside him. The servant bows and informs him that Mr. Boo from the Wandering Beast Pavilion has arrived. Opposite them stands Gigi, offering a respectful greeting and identifying the seated man as the master of the all-encompassing pavilion. The man accepts the greeting and introduces himself as Baek Chi-young-shin. A glimmer of surprised approval appears on his face when he notices that Ji-eun-so's aura is much more formidable than the rumors suggested. He taps his index fingers lightly on the table. He asks if Yoon-sol has heard about recent events, adding that the Demon Palace is in an awkward position because of what happened, and that they cannot simply ignore the demands of the 10 demon sects. Yoon-sol responds with a quiet question. Are the Demon Palace and the 10 demon sects separate entities? Chi-young-shin studies him, then asks if no one has explained this to him, noting with slight disbelief that the Wandering Beast Pavilion seems unaware of the broader movements in Murim. He begins to explain. The Demon Palace, he explains, is an alliance formed by the 10 demon sects. They cannot be completely separated, but they are not the same thing. Traditionally, someone from one of these 10 sects becomes the master of the Demon Palace, but the previous master of the palace was not. Furthermore, not every sect of the demonic path is on friendly terms with the demonic palace. Yoon-so listens and quietly confirms that he understands. The relationship between the palace and the sects is purely cooperative, and many demon path sects generally dislike the demon palace. Still maintaining a slight smile, Chi-young-shin continues. He admits that, in truth, the plan of the 10 demon masters was never intended to select successors for the sects. Its true purpose was to cultivate people capable of destroying the orthodox martial arts masters. His smile fades, replaced by a calm, composed expression as he reveals the true nature of the competition. The 10 demon masters competition was conceived by the Demon Palace to eliminate the highest ranks of the orthodox Murim Alliance. Yoon-so quietly sits down at the table opposite him as Chi-young-shin continues. The 10 demon sects initially rejected the idea, but the Demon Palace persistently contacted them until they finally sent their disciples. And during that very competition, those disciples died. A dark shadow makes Chi-young-shin's features harder as he adds that their deaths were Yoon-so's fault. Now that Yoon-sol is sitting as he should, Chi-young-shin continues to press him. Because of all this, the Demon Palace is stuck in an awkward position. Yoon-sol listens, and not a single emotion crosses his face. Chi-young-shin explains that this is why he wanted to meet with Yoon-sol, to punish him under the guise of an exam. He asks if Yoon-sol is aware of this. Yoon-sol replies that he is. Impressed by Yoon-sol's steadfastness, Chi-young-shin interlaces his fingers and remarks that Yoon-sol seems to have come prepared. Yoon-sol replies yes again, folding his own fingers together on the table and stating that he is fine with whatever this exam turns out to be. Chi-young-shin's expression changes, becoming thoughtful, almost admiring. He tells Yoon-sol that it is acceptable. Then he straightens up and claps his hands once, announcing that he has spoken long enough and that they should move on to the main point. Rising from his seat, he slowly walks around in circles, appraisingly, without taking his eyes off Yoon-sol. He explains that the Fire Rain Sword Sect and the White Demon Temple have done Yoon-sol a favor. Yoon-sol, puzzled, asks what he means. Chi-young-shin reveals that they have granted him access to the Pavilion of 10,000 Demonic Truths, the archive of martial arts texts of the Demonic Palace. He lifts a plaque and shows it to him. It is the Golden Monkey Plaque, an item required to enter the pavilion. It grants access to the first floor, which is the lowest rank, but it alone contains 25,000 martial arts texts, a huge advantage. But Chiyongshin adds that this also means that Youngseo has almost no chance of passing the exam safely. That is why they are doing him this favor, so that no one can accuse them of mistreating him. He begins to reveal the essence of the exam. Chiyongshin states clearly, Youngseo must withstand 5 attacks from a martial arts master chosen by the White Demon Temple. With a slight smile, Chiyongshin hands him a sign and reminds him that the chief instructor resigned from his position during the competition to guarantee Yoonseol's success. He says he asked the head instructor repeatedly why he did this, but the only answer he ever got was, "You'll find out." As the sign approaches Yoonseol's hand, Chiyongshin adds that he hopes to witness the answer himself. Later, after leaving Chiyongshin's office, Yoonseol steps into the hallway. A faint sound catches his attention, and he turns around. Instructor Jin is walking toward him. Recognition flashes between them instantly. Jin greets him by name with casual warmth. Approaching him, Instructor Jin says he heard the news that Yoonseol should be here for the exam. Yoonseol confirms this and asks what brought Jin here. Both look down the hallway from which Jin came. Jin explains that he has many connections in the all-encompassing pavilion. He helped the chief instructor on Hell Island, acting as a substitute for the pavilion master who was absent at the time. Yoonseol nods. He understands. The sign in his hand catches Jin's eye. Jin points to it and asks if Yoonseol is going to visit the 10,000 Demonic Truths Pavilion for the exam. The suddenness almost catches Yoonseol off guard, but he answers yes. Jin rubs his chin thoughtfully, then offers advice, since Yoonseol was once his student. He tells him that Jianghu is a frightening place, that no good deed is ever offered without a motive. There is always some hidden motive or scheme behind it, and the same is true here. But with a slight smile, he pats Yoonseol on the shoulder and tells him that even so, he is sure that Yoonseol will be able to find an opportunity in the midst of danger. Trees grow from their roots, he reminds him. He urges Yoonseol to remember this and do his best. Yoonseol bows his fist to his palm and thanks him. Jin accepts this, and smiling again, says he hopes Yoonseol will do well. In the next scene, in bright daylight, Yoonseol now stands before a massive metal door carved into the mountain. A quiet sigh of awe escapes his lips as he realizes its presence. This is the 10,000 Demonic Truths Pavilion. He takes a step forward and pushes the door. Inside, he stops at the entrance, stunned by the expanse before him. Light spills across towering shelves and endless rows of texts. His jaw drops, and the quiet, "wow," escapes before he even realizes it. He enters, scanning the shelves, noting that this is no ordinary library. A thought strikes him. Could all these books be about martial arts techniques? He stops at the nearest shelf and starts there. He picks up one book, then another, then another. One turns into two into 8, stacked in his arms before he even notices. His mind returns, and he realizes the truth. It's a trap. These may be secret martial arts techniques, but he won't be able to learn any of them in a single day. If he gets too carried away and tries to absorb everything, he will waste the precious time he has. That must be their intention. The Fire Rain Sword Sect and the White Demon Temple are trying to distract him, so he remembers Instructor Jin's words and pulls himself together. He must not be shaken. He must find opportunity within danger. He puts back every book he has collected and goes deeper into the pavilion, silently repeating Jin's words. A tree grows from its roots. He pauses, focusing sharply. The phrase spins in his mind. Root. My roots. A revelation comes. He activates his heightened senses and rushes between the shelves, searching quickly. Not this one. Not that one. Not this one. Not that one. His eyes scan relentlessly. Then his gaze falls on a particular spine, and something in him flashes with recognition. His eyes widen. He reaches for the shelf and pulls it out. The title reads, The Turn of the Stray Beast. Excitement shows on his face when he sees it. There really is something from the Wandering Beast Pavilion here. He flips through the pages, his mind racing, wondering what technique is contained within. Then his thoughts come to a sudden halt. Shock sweeps across his features. His mouth opens slightly. His eyes widen as the contents reveal themselves to him.